Chapter 781. Can't they fix it? Li Yunxin asked immediately. Xie hesitated for a while as if his mind was still slow. Li Yunxin shouted, "Don't think. Answer me immediately." They are very difficult," Xie said. He was being questioned by Li Yunxin and was under his control. If it was anyone else, their psychological defense would have collapsed very quickly. But Xie slowly calmed down and his consciousness became clearer, showing an unimaginably strong psychological quality. His words became more organized and he even began to ask rhetorical questions like before. "You should know. You are also a person of the civilized world. A problem with a precision machine is not something that can be fixed by a few non-professionals, let alone something like Yunshan." This was exactly what Li Yunxin was worried about. Perhaps there was such a possibility. Grandmaster D thought that they had fixed it. For example, if the windshield of a car was broken, he went to find an ordinary piece of glass to replace it. It seemed to be fine, but it was not the same as fixing. Of course, this still needed to be confirmed. So he asked the second question. "Why did you leave back then? Why did you want to escape into deep space? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of?" Xie murmured. This time, Li Yunxin did not stare at him to urge him. Because he felt that Xie momentary confusion was not because he was stalling for time, but because it was indeed a long time ago, and it was a little difficult to think about it. If he did not have this reaction, Li Yunxin would have suspected that he was lying. Because it was something that happened tens of thousands of years ago, and it was only known from the information. Thinking about it now, it would indeed make people hesitate for a while. Fortunately, Xie did not hesitate for long. He blinked nervously, because, Gaia. Netherworld Mother. There is something under the ground. This confirmed what Grandmaster D had said. Li Yunxin immediately shouted, "What I'm asking is, why did you run so far away?" Xie looked confused again. But this time it was not because he could not think of anything, but because he did not understand Li Yunxin's question. He asked, "What do you mean?" Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows. "If you can't stay here, why not go to another planet in the solar system?" Xie had a strange expression on his face. It was as if he couldn't help but want to taunt and ridicule Li Yunxin, but when he thought that he was still in Li Yunxin's hand, he held back. After such a long period of torture, he finally learned something. But she still wasn't tame. She asked in the tone that he was used to, "Why don't you stay in the place where you were born for the rest of your life? Like staying in the community you were born in for the rest of your life? That place can also satisfy all your needs. In fact, from a material point of view, it's even more comfortable in the short term. I told you that your world is too backward, you don't understand." Li Yunxin raised her hand and slapped him again. "Speak properly," she said in a deep voice. Xie gritted his teeth. Fine, you can think of it this way. What is the essence of a civilization? It was development, expansion, conquest. Even in the Stone Age, primitive people couldn't stay in caves all the time. If they wanted to expand and conquer, they had to develop. If they wanted to develop, they had to at least have flints as weapons. So they had to migrate to more places with flints. At the level of our civilization, what restricts development and progress is no longer the resources of your backward civilization. It's the conditions. Li Yunxin raised his hand again. But when he heard the word conditions, he put down his hand. "What do you mean?" Have you seen?" Xie gritted his teeth and laughed. "A physics laboratory built with a black hole as big as the sun as the core and 6 stars within 15 light-years as the power? A physics laboratory across 11 star systems. Can you imagine that we destroyed half of the spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy in an experiment to verify a theoretical idea? Where can you find such high-energy conditions in the solar system?" Xie shouted. "Everything is for development. In order to develop, to set sail, we almost dismantled the entire solar system. Why do you think we have to run so far?" Li Yunxin was silent for a while. With his knowledge, it was indeed difficult to imagine the level of technology that Xie was talking about, if he didn't deliberately exaggerate to protect himself. But it was true that he couldn't see Venus in the starry sky from here. On the night when Bai Yanjun showed up and taught him how to possess dragons, he noticed this. However, but with such a level of development, they sent a person like you to support them? Xie coldly snorted and asked back, "What? Do you think this is your world?" After receiving a distress signal, they sent a land aircraft to the scene of the accident? We are more than 2 million light-years away from here. We are no longer in the Milky Way galaxy, and we have even passed the Andromeda Nebula. The only way to come back here is through field teleportation. Li Yunxin thought for a moment and suddenly asked an irrelevant question. If the indigenous people of this world are armed with matchlock guns, do you think it is possible to kill all the cultivators and demons in the world? Xie Xing was stunned and then laughed. Haven't you realized? This world has been around for 40,000 years. Why is it still in the farming stage? Of course Li Yunxin had thought about it, but he ignored Xie Xing and asked another question. What if they have a steam engine? Xie Xing snorted. Why, do you want to lead this world into an industrial society? Li Yunxin said, then they can use oil. Xie Xing frowned in confusion. After thinking for a while he suddenly realized, so you already know what those people on Yunshan are going to do. Li Yunxin said calmly, what do you mean? Xie Xing showed a knowing smile. You must have heard that those people on Yunshan want to leave here. You should also know that they want Dragon Island, want the energy underground. If I'm not wrong, you came here in such a hurry to ask me something because things have reached a critical juncture. Maybe Yunshan has already reached the sky above Dragon Island? You can't stop them. You should also know that once Dragon Island extracts the energy underground, the so-called entrance to the netherworld will open. So you came here to ask me if we can use other energy sources such as oil to solve this problem? Let me tell you clearly, it's impossible. Oil can't move Yunshan. Only I know what to do to solve this problem. When he said this, Li Yunxin was expressionless. Therefore Xie Xing realized that he had grasped the key point. The people on Yunshan did send them a message asking for help a long time ago. Along with the message they also introduced the situation of this world at that time, what methods they planned to use, and what the future might be like. When he came to this world and saw the appearance of this world, he realized that the rule of Yunshan was stable. Of course the things about Yunshan were inadvertently revealed by Li Yunxin during the interrogations. Xie Xing's ability to integrate information was not inferior to this terrifying enemy in front of him. He quickly deduced the whole picture. Just like what Li Yunxin did in the past. When the enemy interrogated him he also obtained information from the enemy. This was an unavoidable two-way process. Since Yunshan's rule was stable and powerful, it meant that they had absolute authority over this world. He came to the sea to find his own organization, to find Shinryu. After that, he realized that he went the wrong way. His organization should be on Yunshan. Now that Li Yunxin's questions began to involve the core secrets of this world, it meant that the people on Yunshan had already come into contact with him and even laid their cards on the table. When he met him he also said something like this, I thought I got a trump card but it turned out to be a chicken rib. Combining all this information Xie Xing believed that he knew the truth. The people on Yunshan used a certain method to fix the system that had a problem. This was doubtful. He also said that the problem couldn't be fixed in this world. And the people of Yunshan who believed that they fixed the problem were currently planning to escape this world. But if Yunshan left this world they would need to extract energy which would cause a disaster. Li Yunxin didn't want to see such a disaster, which was why he wanted to obtain a solution from Seiji. Xie Xing realized that his chance to escape had finally arrived. In fact, he should have done this long ago. He should have told Li Yunxin the truth of this world and made him realize that this wasn't a good place to stay for long. But before, Li Yunxin wouldn't give him a chance to speak. Li Yunxin was an extremely confident person who would only ask what he wanted to know during every interrogation. Li Yunxin was also an extremely paranoid person who would use frightening torture if he didn't get a satisfactory answer. It was rare for Xie Xing to have a chance to communicate with Li Yunxin like this. Li Yunxin realized just how great the difference between the two civilizations was. It was so great that he couldn't understand many things at all. It was just like how a person from his previous world couldn't tell a caveman that he was using a needle to stab a caveman's body not to kill them, but to save them. But now, this caveman had obtained a lot of information, and was slowly understanding the meaning behind the information. He could let Li Yunxin understand how foolish it was to imprison him here. Thus he took a deep breath and calmed himself down. He looked at Li Yunxin and said, now you understand why I'm here. I'm here to save. This world is going to be destroyed in the hands of the Netherworld Mother. He paused here and looked at Li Yunxin's expression. If Li Yunxin's expression didn't have any flaws, or if there was a hint of mockery, it meant that Li Yunxin most likely knew the deeper truth. Then he had no choice but to tell Li Yunxin about that matter to gain Li Yunxin's trust. He had received training to be able to detect the extremely minute changes in a person's expression. Li Yunxin had remarkable abilities in this world, but ordinary people wouldn't understand this technique. It was also extremely difficult to disguise himself in front of Li Yunxin. In this aspect, Xie Xing thought that he was an expert. Then, he noticed that the corner of Li Yunxin's mouth was slightly raised. and his eyes were slightly enlarged, as if he was relieved of a heavy burden. His answer made him feel at ease. The people on Cloud Mountain must have said something similar to him, and the two had verified each other. Thus, he took back the words he had prepared and continued, "But leaving here doesn't mean that we can rest easy. You can't imagine how dangerous and difficult it is to travel in deep space. Cloud Mountain was built tens of thousands of years ago. The people on Cloud Mountain think that it is enough to ensure their safety, within the solar system, maybe. But once we leave the solar system, Cloud Mountain won't be able to hold on. It's too small. The smallest development ship in our world is 10 times its size. It needs to undergo some modifications, and the modification method is with me. If you leave with the people on Cloud Mountain, only death awaits you." "You said that I'm useless." You should have heard some of their very confident statements. But what I want to tell you is that their confidence is like the confidence of a knight in the cold weapon era in front of a machine gun. They can't withstand a single blow. "Let me out," Xiaxing said. "I know that the misunderstanding between you and me is due to cognitive limitations. In the past, your vision was limited to this world. You felt that I came here to seize your power, authority, and status. But now you should know that I don't need these at all. From the beginning there was no conflict between you and me." Li Yunxin was still silent for a while. Xiaxing observed his expression but found nothing. This made him slightly shocked. Then Li Yunxin smiled. "Are you observing me?" "What? You're observing me?" Li Yunxin stopped smiling. "Right after you said that this world was going to be destroyed by the Netherworld Mother." Xiaxing unconsciously widened his eyes. "Maybe it's because you've been tortured by me for too long, and your mind isn't clear." Li Yunxin put his hands behind his back and sighed softly. "When you were observing my reaction, you forgot to restrain yourself. At that time, you were very nervous. I could see that. This means that you didn't say anything. If I had shown any other attitude at that time, you would have used another story to fool me. Am I right? The Great Tribulation you're talking about isn't the Netherworld Mother. Now I can confirm this." "You." Xiaxing opened his mouth. "How could you? That's why I said that you're unlucky." Li Yunxin smiled. "There's probably no one else in this world who knows our observation method. In the end you bumped into me. I've never seen a main character with such bad luck as you." Xiaxing tried to make another effort. He quickly told himself to calm down and looked sincere. "You've misunderstood. What I wanted to say but didn't say was that there might be other people underground who don't want us to leave. But then I realized this, and you should also know this." Li Yunxin waved his hand. "The Great Tribulation won't be this. When I was talking to you just now, I mentioned a few words." He looked at Xiaxing. "Matchlock, steam engine, and oil. Your expression and words told me that you're not unfamiliar with these three concepts, and it's not difficult for you to understand them. This means that your civilization has indeed gone through these stages during its development." "So what?" "It's just," Xiaxing exclaimed softly. But he quickly realized something and stopped talking. Li Yunxin smiled. "You've thought it through too? In this world today, some laws of physics are different. For example, things like supernatural powers and Taoism. If your world has always been like this, the technological line that you've experienced will definitely take a different path. But you know what I mentioned means that the physical laws of your previous world and my previous world are similar, or even exactly the same. We're taking the same path. So, the current state of this world isn't what it used to be. Something happened and it's been changed. This change must be very important, so the people on Cloud Mountain aren't afraid that you're in my hands, and they aren't afraid that I'll ask you. Because they know that you won't say it. You also know this, so you have a tacit understanding with them when you lied to me. Since you've tried so hard to hide this matter, I think that this matter is related to the real Great Tribulation. Tell me, am I right?" Xiaxing was silent for a long time before he regained his composure. "Yes." Li Yunxin looked at him. "Every time I ask you, you say that you'll tell me the truth this time. But you're lying to me every time. What do you want me to do to you now?" Xiaxing raised his head. "Take away that monster below. Imprison me here alone, and make sure that I'm conscious." "Oh? Tell me why I'm doing this?" "Because even if I can't tell you what the real Great Tribulation is, the Netherworld Mother's threat does exist. You and I have the same understanding of Cloud Mountain's situation. Maybe I can't help you escape the Great Tribulation, but I can at least help you escape from the Netherworld Mother. But if you continue to torture me like this, I might really go crazy. When that happens, if you want to use Cloud Mountain, you won't be able to find someone who can repair it. I know you want to talk about Qinzhao. She can't do it. She came 2,000 years earlier than me. What she has mastered is already outdated." Li Yunxin thought for a moment. One last question. Why can't I tell you? Xie Xing was silent for a long time. Then he said, because it concerns the survival of my civilization. Li Yunxin sighed. He could tell that Xie Xing was telling the truth. This meant that if Xie Xing didn't want to confess, Qin Zhao might not be able to get anything out of him. This person. Although he didn't have a good personality, he was the norm for people in this job. You couldn't expect a secret agent to kill mercilessly and deceive people without blinking an eye. You couldn't expect him to have a kind heart and a soft personality. But among these people there were some people who could endure unimaginable pain for a dream or goal. Xie Xing was one of them. You better pray that I can use you. Li Yunxin shook his head. Because in this world, death is far from the end. After saying this, he waved his hand at the sea. The mermaid that had been trembling in the water due to his aura immediately turned into a white light and was put into his sleeve. Then, it disappeared, the violent and domineering netherworld chi and the giant palms of a dozen monsters pressed down from all directions. Chapter 782. When Li Yunxin escaped into the painting was still in Red Lady's hand. Now that he appeared, he found that the painting had fallen into the mud at the bottom of the sea. It was so dark that he could not see anything clearly. However, the wolf spine angry lion spear was inserted next to the painting, emitting a dim light, which made him feel danger. He was shocked. He put the painting into his sleeve with his left hand and pulled out the spear with his right hand. He knew that since Red Lady wanted to protect him, she would not deliberately leave him here. Something must have happened. He was anxious and in a rage his spiritual power poured out. The spear was filled with the terrible power in his body, and it immediately buzzed. Even the tip of the spear was forced to move more than 100 feet. Now he knew the origin and power of the spear. As soon as the light came out, the dozens of giant hands that came to catch him immediately turned into rolling black fog, like snow meeting boiling water. A terrible roar burst out, and the whole sea was dispersed by the great force, revealing the bottom of the ocean. Even the huge bodies of those monsters were blasted back more than a dozen steps by the explosion. Li Yunxin jumped up from the bottom of the sea. He first pierced the heads of two monsters with his spear, and then swept over their bodies that were like mountains, going straight to the northeast. He sensed the aura of the three monsters around Grandpa D. The aura of the 10,000-year-old ancestor was still very far away. He entered the painting and talked to Xie Xing for no more than a dozen breaths. Red Lady's situation was not so critical that she temporarily put him into the sea. She must have been attacked by someone else. From the time he appeared to the time he saw Grandpa D and the other three, it only took 3 breaths. Li Yunxin found that the 3 monsters around Grandpa D had become bigger. Even the smallest Zero was now almost the same size as the monsters. The other 2 were even half a body taller than the monsters in the sea. Grandpa D stood high on Zero's shoulder, while number 1 and number 2 stood beside him. The 3 existences exuded a powerful and terrible aura. Even the seemingly ignorant monsters subconsciously stayed away from them. The 3 existences exuded a powerful and terrifying aura. Even the seemingly ignorant monsters subconsciously distanced themselves from them. Now the ocean was filled with the netherworld chi, and the spiritual chi had been forced away. Currently, the ocean was filled with netherworld chi, and the spiritual chi had been forced to the point where not even a trace was left. Because the person in Zero's palm was as eye-catching as a flame in the night. Wild spiritual power was released, firmly protecting him from being crushed by this monster. But Li Yunxin could also see that such a flourishing momentum could not be maintained for long. In this kind of environment, Red Lady was already at a disadvantage when fighting against the devils. After that, he fought alone for a long time and was already an arrow at the end of its flight. He stopped in front of number 0 and looked at Grandpa D, who was on his shoulder. The Red Lady in his palm seemed to want to say something to him, but now that she was using all her strength to resist the pressure of that monster, she was actually unable to say a single word. Li Yunxin frowned and looked at Grandpa D. "Friend, what do you mean?" Grandmaster D's face was calm. It was a sense of security brought to him by the fact that the 3 monsters around him had been successfully refined. He even smiled slightly. "You've gone 1 round. Where did he go?" "Where could I have gone in a dozen breaths? I guess you went to ask someone for advice." Grandpa D smiled. "Xie Xing is in your hands. Did you ask him for confirmation?" Li Yunxin glanced at Red Lady. Red Lady shook her head gently. Grandpa D smiled again. "This demoness is very unyielding." She didn't say anything. Li Yunxin slowly relaxed his brows. "Yes. I asked him for confirmation. And the result is roughly the same as what you said." Li Yunxin looked at Grandpa D. I believed you at first. But after seeing your current situation, if what you said is true, why did you use her to threaten me? Grandpa D shook his head. It's not a threat. It's a proof of loyalty. He slowly raised his hand and pointed at Red Lady. Since you believe me and want to go with me, kill her. Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows. What kind of loyalty is that? You're a smart person. I don't need to say much. Grandpa D sighed softly. I know this demoness has gone through fire and water with you. She's loyal to you. Your companions and the people in the underworld should also know. So if you kill her, it's equivalent to breaking up with those people. They will never trust you again. Li Yunxin was silent for a while and turned to look at Red Lady. Red Lady also looked at him. They did not speak, but Li Yunxin understood what she meant. Do as he said. In fact, it was not a big deal to do as he said. He brought Red Lady out to ask her to die so that he could arrange the next step for her. Now he used her to gain Grandpa D's trust. Could be considered killing two birds with one stone. He exhaled softly, smiled, and slowly raised his hand. His palm was aimed at the demoness in number 0's hand. He did not even need to use all his strength to hit her. She would be like an arrow at the end of its flight. Red Lady clenched her teeth and closed her eyes. But when Li Yunxin aimed at her for a while, he suddenly realized one thing. The two fake saints on Mount Yinshan, Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia, knew his situation like the back of their hands. Even though they got very detailed information, they still guessed his heart wrong in the end. Later those two died. How much did Grandpa D know about his situation? Grandpa D was not a fool. Now that he wanted to make trouble here, he should have done some homework. So he should know that the former Li Yunxin and the current Li Yunxin were slightly different. For example, Lu Gongzan. So many people wanted to use old Lu to make trouble, which meant that almost the whole world knew that he cared about old Lu. At this point, if he said that his feelings for Lu Gongzan were just for mutual use, no one would believe it. As for Red Lady, even if she was not as good as old Lu, it was unreasonable for him to kill her for a proof of allegiance. Normally, Li Yunxin would not do this. At least, he would not do it without hesitation. Only the abnormal Li Yunxin would do this. If this Li Yunxin asked something else from Xie Sheng and knew that what Grandpa D said was a lie, then he would grit his teeth and kill Red Lady. That was why he clenched his teeth and killed Red Lady. He was eager to gain Grandmaster D's trust so that he could carry out other conspiracies. Grandpa D's move was smart. Unfortunately, he thought he was too stupid. So he slowly put down his hand and sneered, "Friend, what I hate most in this world is being threatened and coerced. Proof of allegiance? Fuck you. Let her go now. I'll pretend that nothing happened." Grandpa D's face suddenly darkened. The three monsters around him did not feel anything. Obviously, he put them in a dormant state again. He stared at Li Yunxin for a long time without saying a word. Then he slowly exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Your mouth is really annoying. However, after saying that, Zero's palm loosened. Red Lady turned into a red light and flew to Li Yunxin's side. Li Yunxin raised his hand and supported her with a gentle force. Now you don't want to pledge your allegiance? Grandpa D did not smile. He looked at them for a while and said, "It depends on whether you are sincere or not. So you want to take them with you? How many people?" Li Yunxin said sarcastically, "Oh, do we need to book tickets? It's not as simple as you think. There are many specific details." Grandpa D frowned and thought for a while. "Since you are going with us, you don't need to use the mother-child plate to restrain the netherworld aura. You have taken the people you care about. You don't need to care about the rest." "No," Li Yunxin said, "I have my plan." "What plan?" Li Yunxin said with a faint smile. "Our relationship is not good enough to share all the information. For example, you will never tell me why the mother-child plate on Mount Yinshan can reconstruct the spiritual power of this world. So don't ask." Hiding the truth could deepen the trust between them. Li Yunxin knew this well. It worked. Grandpa D thought for a while and his expression became more relaxed. "Okay. But we need to solve the problem in front of us first. I need the netherworld aura. Maybe it is not enough now." He looked at the three people beside him. "We need to make them stronger. Only then can we take over the Dragon Island." Li Yunxin understood that he was referring to the netherworld aura in the bodies of the monsters on the ocean. It might not be enough, but it was true that he did not want him to refine himself with the netherworld aura and become stronger. But this was Grandpa D's reasonable precaution. He said simply, "Okay. We will get rid of the 10,000-year-old ancestor first. You take the netherworld aura from the ocean and refine him. Then I will go back to Penglai Island and say that I have no power to fight back." My relationship with Qingshui is not bad. She will help me. I will lure her out of Penglai. Do you have a way to stop her? He frowned. No. There is a better way. First, use the Heaven and Earth Mother Plate to seal this sea. Qingshui has not refined the netherworld. She will be easier to control. No. I will go with you to Penglai Island with her. Grandpa D pointed at Zero. You said you caught me. Qingshui will definitely come out to see me. When the three of us attack her, she will not be able to fight back. You are careful. Li Yunxin smiled. Okay. Then let's get to work. Let me see how strong the three people beside you are. You seal the ocean first. I will go and kill these things. The 10,000-year-old ancestor is addicted to eating there. The longer we delay, the harder it will be to deal with him. After saying this, he shouted, Little fish, let's go. In the blink of an eye, two figures turned into flowing lights and rushed toward the group of enemies. Grandpa D stood on Zero's shoulder without moving. He squinted and watched for a while. He realized that Li Yunxin was trying his best. Anyone who was stabbed by his spear could not get up again. In just a few dozen breaths of time, 7 or 8 demons had already fallen. He heaved a sigh of relief. Seal the ocean. He liked Li Yunxin's suggestion. It meant that he could return to Yunshan and stay in that safe place. The people on Yunshan were not strong enough. Even if there was one person with 1/10 of Li Yunxin's courage, he did not need to take the risk himself. Grandpa D thought bitterly. Civilians were civilians. They had been regarded as celestial beings and immortals for a long time. They actually thought that they were noble. A little danger would make them worry about their hard-won lives. They did not come, so he had to. The three people behind him were not strong enough. But there was no other way. Daotong and Kenzo people were useful. But it was a double-edged sword. They were growing too fast even if they had been trying to control the speed of their growth. In this world, the power of the cultivators gradually frightened them. They had to abandon them. The three people behind him were a new attempt. They combined the fragments of Mother Earth and the people whose consciousness had been tempered to create this kind of thing. But the consciousness of the people was eroded by the netherworld aura and became difficult to control. They were like teenagers in the mortal world. They lacked self-control and emotional management, so he, the parent, had to lead them. But now he had Li Yunxin. If Li Yunxin took the lead, the other three could be controlled by him from Yunshan. He didn't need to make decisions by his side anymore. Grandpa D's fingers moved slightly. Zero, number 1 and number 2 woke up. Our goal is about to be achieved, he said in a low voice. Now I'm going back to Yunshan. You guys stay here. He told them about the agreement he had reached with Li Yunxin. Number 3 immediately shouted, We really? Her body was huge now. Her voice was even louder. Fortunately, it was drowned out by the sound of fighting in the distance. Realizing this, she quickly lowered her voice. Are we really going to bring him? I don't like him. We're just giving him a daydream. Grandpa D smiled. After we get the Dragon Island, we'll kill him. But you guys have to cooperate with him to kill the 10,000-year ancestor. Don't do your best. Just support him. Exhausting his power will be beneficial to us. He thought for a while and added, There's another possibility. He also wants to weaken your power. This is very likely to happen. If that's the case, you guys should leave the battlefield first. There are 3 of you. The 10,000-year ancestor will want to break through a little first. When he can't hold on anymore, you guys can go and help him. Remember, preserving your power is the most important. Number 3, remember this. At this moment, Grandpa D was completely different from the aggressive and ruthless Grandpa D he was when he faced Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia in the secret room of Cloud Mountain. He seemed to have become a parent. He repeated the words tirelessly, afraid that he would miss out on any details that they might not have thought of. Number 3 was indeed like a rebellious and active child. She said, I know all these. You should tell the 2 of them. Grandpa D smiled. I'm leaving. At this moment he was no longer afraid of being seen by anyone. He raised his hand and tapped a few times in the air. After waiting for 3 to 4 breaths, a silver light broke through the air from the distant sea surface. This thing suddenly stopped about 100 feet away from the 4 of them. It immediately stirred up the air and caused a terrifying explosion. A huge wave that was tens of meters high was stirred up by it. It seemed to have triggered a tsunami. However, number 3 only needed to raise his hand, and the raging waves instantly dissipated and were forcefully suppressed. It was an oval-shaped object that was shining with silver light. It was about the length of 2 people and the height of 1 person. Grandpa D took a breath on number 0's shoulder. He flew more than 300 feet away and landed on the top of that object. Just like the wall in the hall of Penglai Island, A round hole appeared and closed silently. Grandpa D entered it. Then, with another explosion, it disappeared into the horizon. Chapter 783. As soon as Grandmaster D left, number 3 seemed to be in charge. She turned to number 0 and number 1 and said proudly, "Did you hear what I said just now? We have to kill that 10,000-year-old ancestor. By then don't get in my way." Number 0 finally spoke. It was also a female voice, but it seemed to be gentle and serious. Grandmaster D said that Li Yunxin will be the vanguard. Don't get in his way. "Humph, a silent gourd and a coward," number 3 said disdainfully. "I don't need you to care about me." As soon as she said this, the ocean water around her whirled and swayed away. The netherworld aura around her was instantly absorbed. Looking at number 3 again, he was like a tiger that had entered a flock of sheep, pouncing towards Li Yunxin and Red Madam. Number 0 and number 1 had to follow him. At this time, Li Yunxin and Red Lady had already reached the center of the monsters. The breath of the female monster was getting weaker and weaker. She had stayed in the netherworld aura for so long and had been fighting fiercely. Even though she was at the peak of the profound realm and had a dragon soul, she couldn't hold on anymore. Her body showed obvious signs of being infected by the netherworld aura. Black blood was crawling on her exposed skin, which made her situation worse. Li Yunxin used the last bit of spiritual power in her body to protect her. After rushing forward for a while, Red Madam said, "Yunxin, I can't make it." Li Yunxin let out a sigh of relief. "Okay. Then just do as I told you just now. You will die after your cultivation dissipates. Remember the important points I told you. Don't make any mistakes." Red Lady nodded slightly. "I'm very happy that you said that in front of Grandmaster D." Li Yunxin dodged the 4 pairs of demonic claws that came from his side and swooped down with her to avoid the demonic mountains in front of him. Then he smiled and said, "I'm serious. But if you really want to." Red Lady said, "I don't think that person is trustworthy. He will probably turn against you when we arrive at Penglai Island. Besides, he has gone back to Cloud Mountain now. You can't do anything to him. When it comes to turning hostile, he's not as fast as I am." Li Yunxin sneered, "Before he arrives at Penglai Island, I will kill his 3 men here." Master D himself was not important. Without Daotong and Kenzo they would lose their claws and become useless. It's the same logic now. Without these 3 he's also a cripple. I only wanted him to use the Heaven and Earth Mother Plate to help me gather the netherworld chi here and turn this place into the netherworld on the ground. As long as this is done, I'm not afraid of them doing anything else on Mount Yinshan. Li Yunxin slapped a monster in front of him. The monster was immediately forced to take 2 steps back. He then lunged forward with the spear in his hand and pierced the monster's head, causing it to collapse. He values his life and our lives too much. Li Yunxin looked at Red Lady and said, "It's time." Red Lady held on to her last breath. "But, if he finds out that you have changed your mind, what if he uses the mother-child plate to remove the inhibition formation here?" Li Yunxin smiled. "Don't worry. I don't know about this. I don't feel at ease." Li Yunxin had to say, "There are 2 reasons for this. First, I was the one who taught Master D how to control the mother-child plate." "You taught him?" He dodged another 2 demonic claws and sped up his tone. "They are just empty shells of the gods. Their understanding of the Dharma of this world is not even as good as a cultivator in the transcendent state. Shenmu was the one who taught him the Dharma of painting, so they have no chance to understand it. When I made a deal with him on Mount Yinshan, I taught him some methods to control the mother-child plate using the Dharma of painting. But I didn't understand it myself, so I only taught him some things that I figured out temporarily. He can use what I know, but it's not enough for him to cause trouble. It's like someone only teaches you how to use Dharma to set up the inhibition formation, but doesn't teach you how to remove the inhibition formation. You know nothing about cultivation, so what can you do? So once the nether world on the ground is formed, he can't do anything about it." Another point. Li Yunxin suddenly jumped above the group of demons and saw a cloud of fog that was darker than the night in the distance. It's the ancestor of the 10,000 years. Once the netherworld is formed, the netherworld aura will be restricted. But that old demon wants to go around the whole world. When I tell him that the restriction is made by the people on Mount Yinshan, he will definitely go to Mount Yinshan. Then Master D won't have time to cause trouble. Okay, then I don't have to worry. After saying this, Red Lady suddenly jumped down, but it looked more like she was falling. The monster directly below rushed over, grabbed her body and tore her into pieces. But Li Yunxin also jumped down at the same time. A little green light flew out of his palm and locked something. All of this was hidden in the thick and dark netherworld aura. Even if someone was within 3 steps of him, it would be difficult to notice. Red Lady was dead, and number 3 was rushing over from behind. She was huge, and wherever she went, the monsters all retreated as if they were frightened by her momentum. When she approached Li Yunxin, she suddenly stretched out her palm to catch him. But although she was big, she seemed to have brute force like those monsters and was far less flexible than Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin dodged to the side and avoided the palm. But number 3 didn't catch the air and grabbed the head of a monster. She exerted force in her palm, and the monster's head immediately collapsed. The rolling black fog quickly flowed into her body, and she let out a long sigh of satisfaction. Then she turned to look at Li Yunxin. I was just joking. Li Yunxin didn't get angry and only smiled. I can't take a joke. Number 3 brutally exploded the heads of another 2 monsters. Your helper is dead. Everyone will die, Li Yunxin said, and often when they don't expect it. Number 3 snorted. That's good, we can bring one less person. The 10,000-year ancestor is in front. Let me see what you can do. Li Yunxin raised her eyes and looked forward. There were about 100 monsters between them and the 10,000-year ancestor. He was now at the back of the group of monsters and showed the wolf spine raging lion spear. The monsters that were swarming towards Penglai Island changed their direction. But they couldn't swarm at the moment and he could dodge them easily. The place where the 10,000-year ancestor was at was covered in darkness. Now that they were close, they could hear his crazy scream. It didn't sound like a human, but more like some kind of monster. The voice was sharp and shrill, not the same as the previous person. A large area around him had already been cleared. It seemed that even if the monsters were slow in thinking, they would still feel fear. The 10,000-year ancestor's aura was much stronger than Li Yunxin's, and no one knew what level he was at. At this time, 0 and number 2 also came from the back. Li Yunxin suddenly turned and landed on number 3's shoulder. Through the armor, he couldn't see number 3's expression, but from her voice, he could hear that she was shocked and angry. What are you doing? As she said this, she raised her hand to pat Li Yunxin. But Li Yunxin's body flashed and he stood on her other shoulder. Take a break, he said with a tone like he was teasing a child. I feel that your tone is a bit familiar. Who were you before you turned into this thing? Number 3 was furious. What does it have to do with you? We're comrades now, Li Yunxin said with a smile. Look at you 3, you're like children. The hot-tempered and willful third sister, the calm and quiet eldest sister, and the awkward second brother. So, now that Grandmaster D asked you 3 to come out and fight, he probably doesn't have anyone to use. In the past, although the people in Daotong and Kenzo were not controlled, there were a lot of people in the mystic realm and true realm. In this world no one dared to offend them. Now you 3 have to cooperate with me. I don't know if Grandmaster D regrets seeing you like this. You're a child. You're a teenager. We're celestial beings. Number 3 patted him again, and Li Yunxin crawled to the other side like a mudfish. Celestial beings don't say they're celestial beings. So. He dragged his voice and suddenly became serious. In a while, you'll have to face the 10,000-year ancestor. I don't know what Grandmaster D told you before he left. But now you better listen to what I have to say. At this time, 0 and number 2 came to their side. He couldn't see the expressions of the 2 monsters under the heavy armor, but he could see their posture. Their faces were slightly tilted to his side, and he guessed that they heard him. You're strong and you're big. In terms of Dao skills and supernatural powers, you can't compare to me. But compared to the 10,000-year ancestor, you're not strong. So in layman's terms, you're a burden. Li Yunxin said bluntly, I don't care what Grandmaster D told you or what expectations he had. I also don't care what you want to prove to him. But in a while it'll be between adults. The 3 of you better step aside. If the 10,000-year ancestor wants to escape, you have to hold him back. You? Number 3 screamed. But 0 interrupted her. Okay. Grandmaster D told us to help you. Number 3 didn't say anything. But he stretched out his palm and then crushed the heads of the 2 monsters. Before Grandmaster D left, he wanted Li Yunxin to leave the netherworld aura for them. But now, the 3 of them didn't have the intention to absorb the netherworld aura wantonly. Maybe it would be useful in the future. Li Yunxin raised his hand again, and 3 misty green lights appeared in his palm. I have another helper, but it's hard to control. I can only summon him in times of danger. Once that helper appears, I need you to restrain the 10,000-year ancestor. He's almost lost his mind now, and I think he's forgotten about the divine power formation. I set up a formation here and I need 5 formation eyes. But the three of you have high realms, so it's barely enough for you to guard the formation. He flipped his hand and the three green lights flew in three directions. Each of you guard a formation I. When you feel the flow of chi, like this, as he spoke he drew something in the air with his hand. A black fog surged and three tracks appeared in the air. Pour the netherworld aura into this green light. Not much, just a little bit, and I can activate the formation next to the 10,000-year ancestor, trapping him and me firmly. Then, the three of you will attack together and his breath will be stagnant for a while. At that time I'll attack and injure him severely. He frowned and said seriously, remember, you must seize the opportunity. This formation is very exquisite. If one of you hesitates, you won't be able to complete the formation, and you'll have to go through a lot of trouble. The 10,000-year ancestor is getting stronger and stronger, so you must be careful with every step. Number 3 wanted to speak again. But 0 spoke before she could. We'll remember. Li Yunxin nodded seriously. I don't want to die here. You don't want to either. Let's get through this first. Chapter 784. After he finished speaking, there were only a dozen or so monsters between him and the 10,000-year ancestor. The three people behind him followed his orders and dispersed to the other three sides. Intentionally or unintentionally, they also killed the monsters along the way but still did not absorb the netherworld aura. In this way, a vast space was opened for him and the 10,000-year ancestor. In this space there were only a dozen or so monsters left. The others were intimidated by the three gigantic people, and could only surround them, not daring to swarm them. Occasionally a few would come in from the middle, but the pressure on Li Yunxin was greatly reduced. He flew straight to the 10,000-year ancestor and loudly said, Ancestor, I didn't expect that when we meet again, you will become like this. The 10,000-year ancestor ignored him, as if his eyes were only on the netherworld aura in the monsters' bodies. He killed those monsters as if they were chickens. As long as the black light attached to the monster's body, the monster's movement would suddenly slow down as if it was struck by lightning. After another 3 to 5 breaths of time, the huge body instantly withered, quickly turning into bones and then dust. Li Yunxin didn't have to expend much effort to kill these monsters. But he did not dare to take a blow from the monster. He used all of his spirit to move and dodge, then find the opponent's flaw and kill with the spear in his hand. It was not as easy as killing the 10,000-year ancestor. The old thing ignored him and his heart slightly sank. Although he told Red Lady that he had 2 ways to ensure his safety, but both were based on the foundation that the 10,000-year ancestor was still conscious. He had a long talk with this old monster on the stone mountain, so he knew that this old guy was a very rare intelligent person. Refining oneself into a devil and completely losing one's own will, this kind of stupid thing should never happen to him. It must be known that he had been planning for 40,000 years. Even if his temperament had changed greatly and was very different from before, but in a sense he was still himself. The self-will of a mortal at the age of 10 and the self-consciousness of a 30-year-old were also like 2 different people. For the 10,000-year ancestor, this kind of change happened a little faster. As long as he had some reason, he could talk. Li Yunxin loved to have a talk. He also had some confidence that this 10,000-year-old ancestor wouldn't kill him the moment they met. Because in reality, the two of them had quite a good impression of each other back in the stone mountain. Against a decent opponent, it was only right to say a few words before making a move. Because there were too few interesting people in the world. When it came to the level of Li Yunxin and the 10,000-year ancestor, it was even rarer. Therefore he rushed forward again and shouted, When your doppelganger was in Penglai, you were not as quiet as you are now. Do you still remember who you are? The 10,000-year ancestor still ignored him. It wasn't until all the remaining monsters were killed as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood that the terrifying darkness stopped. A voice came from the darkness. I still remember you. Do you want to fight with me or submit to me? His voice was terrifyingly hoarse when he spoke, as if several masses of air were squeezing and rubbing against each other. If it weren't for the fact that some of the words could be roughly discerned, one would think it was just a shrill wind howl. But after this sentence, the darkness quickly converged, and the body of the 10,000-year ancestor slowly condensed. But it was no longer a human. Instead, it was like a tree merged with a man. He had 2 legs, but his feet turned into something similar to tree roots, with many tentacles spreading out. Both his arms. His body was straight and long like the trunk of a tree. The head was nowhere to be seen, only more branches stretching upward. Finally, there was a dense black light at the top of each branch, like a fruit. He condensed from the darkness, but his body was bright. Except for those fruits, His whole body glowed with white light, looking extremely holy. But there were traces of flames flowing in his body, which looked like the meridians of this person. His body wasn't big, only 6 or 7 times the length of Li Yunxin. But Li Yunxin could already feel the terrible momentum. That terrible pressure came crashing down wave after wave. Although it was invisible, it was like a strong wind, as if it wanted to blow his body apart. He had to take a deep breath to barely maintain his body. The realm of the 10,000-year ancestor had far exceeded his expectations. He forced himself to calm down and said, "I," but he only managed to say this one word before the voice of the old demon in front of him suddenly resounded in his mind. "Your method won't work." The voice was directly imprinted in his mind. This kind of method, cultivators with higher realms would also use it on juniors with lower realms. Aside from being startled, there were almost no adverse effects. But now that the 10,000-year ancestor's voice appeared in his mind, it was like a sledgehammer ruthlessly smashing his head, smashing his chi-si, and smashing every inch of his meridians. Caught off guard, he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He had to use his demon energy to guard his mind before he could reply in his mind. "What method?" "Humph." The 10,000-year ancestor's hoarse voice snorted coldly. "I've already entered the Grand Supreme Realm and obtained a trace of Mother Earth vitality. In this world, I'm already an omniscient god. Since I'm omniscient and omnipotent, I know what you're thinking. You plan to fight me first and pretend to be defeated. Then ask those 3 to fight with me, and while we're both injured, you'll reap the benefits. But now that you've seen me, you should know that your current strength isn't worth mentioning. Even with the help in your ear, it'll be hard for you to defeat me. And as for the 3 after you, although I can't see through them, I can clearly see their realms. Even if they absorb all the netherworld energy in this ocean, they're only at the peak of the profound realm. It'll be even harder for them to injure me." The speed of the conversation through the consciousness was extremely fast. The 10,000-year ancestor's words were only a few thoughts that flashed through his mind. Even the voice of me, that Li Yunxin said, had not dissipated. But he already realized that what the 10,000-year ancestor said was the truth. If they really fought, it was impossible for him to pretend to be seriously injured. The moment this thought appeared in his mind, the 10,000-year ancestor seemed to immediately know. He sneered again. "I have a plan. How about I kill those 3 first, then kill Qing Shui on the Dragon Island? After Qing Shui dies, you tell me the method to control the Dragon Island, and I'll keep you as my general." A thought flashed through Li Yunxin's mind. But before he had time to think about it, the 10,000-year ancestor's laughter rang out again. "Exactly. You're more tactful than Qing Shui. And there's someone you value. Keeping you is much better than keeping her. Moreover, she's the incarnation of Hai Tian. If I control the Dragon Island, it'll be the same as killing her. She'll definitely resist." Li Yunxin was shocked. When the 10,000-year ancestor said his thoughts, he thought that the other party was guessing and observing. But now that he realized that the old monster, the old ancestor, could indeed see through his thoughts, what the hell was this? Could the Grand Elder really do this? He found it hard to believe. There must be a reason. The 10,000-year ancestor's voice rang out again. "Of course there's a reason. Where do you think these demons came from? They're formed by the vital chi of the Netherworld Mother. I've absorbed the Netherworld energy and you've also absorbed it. I'm already the Grand Elder now, so I naturally have a way to know what you're thinking." Li Yunxin immediately raised his hand and slapped himself. He hastily made himself think of something else, something of no consequence, as another idea was vaguely coming into his mind. That vague thought was, the 3 subordinates of Grandpa D had also refined the Netherworld energy in this place. The 10,000-year ancestor knew what he was thinking. Could he also know what they were thinking? A person's thoughts were extremely complicated. No one was clearer than Li Yunxin on this point. They were running back and forth in his mind every second. When a person wanted to focus on thinking about something, he would generally pick up a certain thought and think about it carefully. Ordinary people, even those with strong willpower, would find it extremely difficult to restrain the thoughts in their minds. For example, if you said to a person, "Don't think about the person standing behind you right now," that person would immediately think, "There's someone standing behind me." For example, when Li Yunxin was thinking about a thought, if he subconsciously wanted to hide some thoughts that he didn't want to be known by the 10,000-year ancestor and force himself not to think about them, in reality he had already failed. Unless he really didn't have those thoughts. Unless he changed his consciousness into a different person. The mortals in this world couldn't do it. Those with divine arts could do it through some secret techniques. But it also meant that the previous him would die and become a completely different person. However, Li Yunxin could do it. But not now. It was extremely difficult to hypnotize himself and make himself possess the thoughts of another person while ensuring that his original consciousness wouldn't be lost forever in the subconscious stream of consciousness. Even in his previous world, the number of people he knew who could do this could be counted on one hand. He needed time. Because of the situation at hand, he made a very decisive decision. Before some vague thoughts could become clear, he took the initiative to close his snow mountain and Qi Si, as well as his 8 extraordinary meridians, and fainted. This decision was based on his premonition. And the premonition was made up of those vague thoughts in his mind that hadn't yet taken shape and weren't seen through by the old monster. Those thoughts that existed between Li Yunxin's subconscious and his will were actually betting on one thing. Betting that this extremely arrogant and self-confident 10,000-year ancestor would disdain to lie to him just now. Betting that the 10,000-year ancestor would really leave him alive so that he could learn the method to control the Dragon Island. As for whether the 10,000-year ancestor would really take him in as a general or kill him on the spot, it was no longer important. Therefore, the 10,000-year ancestor should protect him and not let him be killed by the demon. And because of the 10,000-year ancestor's arrogance and self-confidence, he wouldn't immediately plant any restrictions on him. He fainted. The 10,000-year ancestor should have realized one thing. He was afraid that his thoughts would be spied on. But a person as arrogant as the old monster should also disdain some of his little tricks. He could see through Li Yunxin's thoughts and force Li Yunxin to make him faint in order to avoid being spied on. What else could he do? He was just stalling for a while. Therefore, what the old monster would do next should be, he sneered twice and suddenly pounced on the 3 people brought by Grandmaster D. His first target was number 2. Number 3 was lively and talkative. Number 0 was a man of few words, but he looked calm and steady. Only number 2 didn't say anything from beginning to end. It was as if he was the 2's follower. But Li Yunxin had sensed their aura before and knew that the strongest among the 3 should be this one. Number 3 was slightly weaker than him, and number 0 was the weakest. The old monster's sudden attack seemed to want to kill number 2 first and then deal with the other 2. But if Li Yunxin was still conscious, he would continue to think about the problem he was thinking about before. Because he also absorbed the netherworld energy, his thoughts could be known by the old monster. Then these 3 also absorbed the netherworld energy, so could the old monster know their thoughts? This question was answered at this time. When the old monster pounced, his body turned into a stream of light. The fiery red meridians in his body shone brightly, almost turning him into a person of fire. The black ball of light on the branches of his body that looked like a fruit turned into a spreading tentacle and went straight for number 2's head with a buzz. But he actually dodged it. But the old monster didn't seem surprised, as if he had already expected this situation. Those tentacles missed and immediately turned back to entangle number 2's limbs. Once the black gas was attached to his body, it spread out in the blink of an eye and tightly wrapped number 2 like glue. At this time, the old monster's body also arrived in front of number 2. The raging flame inside his body was released and condensed into a sharp awl. In just an instant, it hit number 2's chest hundreds of times. It was unknown what material the armor on number 2's chest was made of. Unexpectedly, it was able to withstand the old monster's full-force attack. Only spider web-like cracks spread from the point of impact, but it didn't break. Ever since the old monster's divine ability reached the peak, this was the first time he met such a decent opponent. Since the old monster's attacks were carefree, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Your armor is really hard. Unfortunately, it's no match for my 10,000-year-old ancestor's supreme mysterious technique." He laughed wildly 3 times and suddenly arched his body. The light all in front of him became even more dazzling. "I'll let you know what it means to be unable to withstand a single blow." He bound number 2 and hit him hundreds of times, all in the blink of an eye. When he said these 2 sentences, the other 2 finally reacted. Number 3 shouted, "Trash! Get out of the way." But just as he finished speaking, the 10,000-year-old ancestor's body suddenly straightened. The dazzling awl pierced through number 2's chest and came out from his back. It also smashed the armor outside his body. The old monster laughed. "It's your turn." With that said, he threw number 2 into the sea and faced the rescue of number 0 and number 3. His magical power was great, so he was too lazy to use other methods. Similarly, the black mist-like tentacles attacked first, followed by the awl of light. But with a loud bang, it hit a colorful barrier. Number 3 and number 0 joined hands to use their magical power, firmly blocking the tentacles' path. The awl of light immediately hit the barrier, emitting an extremely sharp and terrifying hum. When the two collided, the olive light in front of the old monster also revealed a colorful light, as if it had the same power as the barrier. The stalemate lasted for 2 breaths of time. The old monster laughed wildly again. If your strength is not good enough, so what if you have a treasure armor to protect your body? Break for me. After this shout, the olive light once again broke through the barrier, piercing through number Zero's body. Chapter 785. When Li Yunxin regained consciousness, he thought it would last for a while, but in reality it was very short. The first thing he saw was the scene of the 10,000-year-old ancestor defeating number 0 with ease. The old demon knocked number 0 to the ground and let out a shrill laugh. I kill demons like slaughtering chickens and dogs, but I didn't think I'd need much strength to kill you. With this kind of ability, do you think you're worthy of going against me? As he laughed maniacally, he turned around and used his black mist-like tentacles to grab hold of number 3 once more. He roared, "Your time of death has come." Then Li Yunxin heard another voice in his ear. Bad luck, bad luck. You're just as bad luck as my master. I've been here for dozens of days and I've seen you get caught again and again. Bah, bad luck. It was the great sage who kept yelling in his ear. He seemed to be very impatient. But without Li Yunxin's permission he couldn't jump out of his own accord. For a moment he was running around in circles, cursing incessantly. Actively blocking his snow mountain Qi and meridians caused him to lose consciousness. This caused some damage to Li Yunxin's body. It took him a breath's worth of time to come back to his senses. The great sage's voice seemed to come from the horizon, from the clouds. Only now did it seem real. He found himself floating on a raging, howling wave. It seemed that the 10,000-year-old ancestor had used some sort of magic on him when he attacked the 3. A thin layer of black mist wrapped around him and suspended him on the surface of the ocean. He didn't move. This was because he knew that this kind of magic was connected to the caster's mind. If he touched that layer of mist, the 10,000-year-old ancestor would immediately know what was going on. The old demon had just called himself omniscient and omnipotent. But from his methods, it seemed that he wasn't telling the truth. At this point, only number 3 was left fighting the 10,000-year-old ancestor. Although she wasn't as strong as number 2, her fighting spirit and reaction speed were far superior. Number 2 was defeated by the old devil's binding and light all, but number 3 used some kind of secret technique to self-destruct his armor the moment he was caught. His limbs were bare as he escaped, dodging the old devil's attacks. Her physical body under the armor was beyond Li Yunxin's expectations. It was not bulging with muscles. On the contrary, it was light black and extremely smooth. This resistance aroused the old devil's interest, and he laughed wildly, his voice almost drowning out the deafening sound of the waves and the wind. Li Yunxin couldn't help but frown. "Great sage, calm down. I have something urgent to do." The Monkey King angrily shouted, "Quiet down? What urgent matter?" Bang. "You, this unlucky ghost, summoned me, old son, and said that my life is linked to yours." But when he saw the Demon King just now, he was so scared that he fainted. How can I, old son, be connected to a coward's life? If I hadn't woken you up, you would have been steamed and eaten by the demons. I'm not your master. Li Yunxin sighed. You didn't faint from fear either. It was just a plan to escape. And because our lives are linked, I knew that you would wake me up. Otherwise, how would I dare to do this? Good great sage, don't be impatient. Give me 15 minutes to finish this and I'll let you out to fight with this demon. You used to think that those little demons were boring, but this should be to your liking, right? The Monkey King seemed to be scratching his ears. Really? 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 Li Yunxin took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Great sage, don't say anything. My cultivation is more important. The Monkey King really didn't say anything. Li Yunxin took a few more deep breaths and immersed his consciousness. Try to immerse yourself in the sea of subconscious. Usually when the surface and subconscious are mentioned, words like under and in are often used to describe them. For example, in the subconscious and at the subconscious level. This will give people the illusion that the subconscious is like a deep, vast, and silent ocean. And the surface consciousness that we can recognize is like the air floating above the sea of subconscious. But this is the same as saying sinking into the snow mountain of Qi and sea of Qi, or guarding the Dantian. It's just to give people an intuitive impression and make it easier to understand. In fact, even in this world, if you cut open the body of a demon or a cultivator, you won't be able to see the actual snow mountain, or Dantian. The so-called subconscious level is the same. If Li Yunxin were to describe the sum of a person's surface consciousness and subconscious, he would feel that these things are more like a universe, an infinite universe. In this universe, countless streams of consciousness are born and extinguished, shuttling back and forth. They interweave together and are connected to each other but also relatively independent. It's very difficult to clearly distinguish which consciousness belongs to the subconscious and which belongs to the surface consciousness. In fact, this is very similar to the universe in reality. The matter in the universe that we can observe is only a very small part of the total amount of the universe. Most of it is unknown matter that can't be observed or recognized in his world. In fact, it's hard to even roughly determine what they look like. The stream of consciousness that constitutes the subconscious is hidden in the void of the universe of consciousness. Countless streams of consciousness from the surface are born, discovered, thought about, forgotten, and then return to the void. And these consciousness that can be captured at any time, if a part of it is really captured, becomes a person's current thought. The other part that is temporarily ignored, that has not yet been captured, forms a part of the memory. The 10,000-year ancestor used his magical ability to peep into Li Yunxin's thoughts, and what he peeped into were those that he has captured. What Li Yunxin needs to do now is to hide those memories that can be captured at any time in front of him. The best way is to only remember a part of them. This is extremely difficult. If it was the Li Yunxin of the past, he would never have even the slightest thought of trying, because he thought it was impossible. But after coming to this world, he found that this kind of thing has already happened to some people. For example, Lord Dongting and those Dragon's Son. They can't hear the word possession. Although it is extremely difficult to ask a person to completely ignore a certain word, Li Yunxin feels that it is always possible. However, the situation of Lord Dongting and the Dragon's Son is different. What they ignore is not the simple word possession, but the specific meaning of possession. For example, when Lord Dongting and a cultivator discuss the Tao, if the cultivator talks about someone in the sect is trying to use the method of possession, he can hear the word possession effortlessly. This is because the meaning of possession at this time does not refer to possession of the dragons, but in the ordinary sense, a relatively common thing in the process of cultivation. However, if the cultivator knows some inside information and asks Lord Dongting if possession of the dragons is true, the fish demon will be at a loss. When Li Yunxin first discovered this situation, he was extremely curious and did not know how it can be done. He even wondered if someone had used a terrifying power to change some kind of law, making them forget. But at this moment he finally understood how it was done. It is not as advanced as changing the law, it is just making a fuss in a person's consciousness. If someone mentions possession of the dragons, Lord Dongting will indeed hear it. When he hears this, before the surface consciousness can react, his subconscious will be aware of it. Then, due to some effect, a certain defense mechanism will be triggered. The subconscious will automatically cut off communication with the surface consciousness on this matter, refusing to provide any information. The surface consciousness responds, it hears it but it doesn't seem to hear it, knowing nothing. If you have to give a similar example, it is quite common. For example, a person is immersed in something and someone next to him says something to him. The environment is not noisy, the sound surges the air and vibrates the eardrums. The person is not deaf, so he should have heard it. But at that time, his surface consciousness is immersed in something and ignores the sound. Therefore, he doesn't hear it. After all, the body is just an empty shell. Even the thought of I am conscious is also controlled by the consciousness itself. If the brain refuses to acknowledge its existence, then a person will feel that he has no brain. Li Yunxin is now trying to be like Lord Dongting and Dragon's Son, consciously forgetting some things. This is to prepare for the worst case, if he falls into the old demon's control. He knows too much information that must not be known by the 10,000-year ancestor. These streams of consciousness that exist in the surface consciousness are not something he can hide. If the process of him thinking is a scene, and the consciousness that he is thinking about is the main character in the scene, the rest of the things that he doesn't want to think about are like passers-by. It is difficult for him to control them, but the 10,000-year ancestor can spy on them through the scene. He must truly forget. Like Lord Dongting and Dragon's Son, he built a defense mechanism in his subconscious. Once the old demon's question involves something that he doesn't want to be known, the subconscious will firmly lock the information before the surface consciousness can react. But he also knows that truly forgetting those memories means that he has become someone else. He can't do this in such a short period of time, so he can only settle for the next best thing. Blocking some consciousness. For example, when the 10,000-year ancestor spies on his thoughts and tries to find a weakness to control him, He will realize that there are few people in this world that he truly cares about. This kind of feeling can't be hidden. Then, for the time being, I really don't care about them. For example, the 10,000-year ancestor spies on his thoughts, wanting to know if his submission is out of sincerity, or if it is just a temporary facade, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. If Li Yunxin really hides such a thought, as long as the old demon asks, "Do you really want to submit to me?" he won't be able to hide it. Then, for the time being, I really want to submit to him. If he wants to do this, he has two advantages. He cultivates. It is very easy for cultivators to meditate. When meditating, the mind is unaware and there is nothing in the thinking lens. In this state, he can choose what he wants and what he hides. The other advantage is himself. When Li Yunxin first came to this world, it was actually easier for him to deal with the 10,000-year ancestor than the current Li Yunxin. At that time, he didn't care about anyone. Any existence in this world, in his eyes, was unfamiliar and could be sacrificed at any time. At that time, he was truly ruthless and wouldn't harm even a hair on his body for anyone. He only wanted to be his former self, and then set up an anchor point for himself to ensure that he won't be lost forever. Li Yunxin took 3 deep breaths, telling himself to enter a meditative state. After about 40 breaths, he slowly opened his eyes. He was originally lying flat on the surface of the sea, inside the restriction left by the 10,000-year ancestor. But when he woke up this time, he immediately sat up. The restriction was triggered, but it quickly dispersed, and didn't cause any harm to him as he originally expected. At this time, the 10,000-year ancestor and number 3 were fighting. As if he felt that victory was in his grasp, he didn't kill in one blow like before. Instead, he became like a lecher wanting to break the armor on number 3's torso one by one. Number 3 knew that she couldn't win, so she retreated into the group of monsters. The monsters didn't have any interest in these two existences, so they lazily attacked. But even so, it gave number 3 some time to breathe. The 10,000-year ancestor was like a tiger entering a flock of sheep. He first killed the monsters, then laughed wildly. "Useless. It was useless. That thing on you is useless. Let this old man see what's underneath." After this wild shout, he finally grabbed number 3's left arm. As if he already knew that she was extremely agile, he used all his strength as soon as he grabbed her, and ripped her left arm off. Number 3 suffered a serious injury and let out a shrill cry of pain. She narrowly dodged the old monster's second attack, then shouted, "Trash! What are you waiting for?" The old monster thought that she was talking to Li Yunxin. Half of the tentacles on his body immediately turned towards Li Yunxin. "Have you thought it through? Do you want to attack this old man?" But Li Yunxin stood in the air above the dark sea, not moving an inch. Ancestor's courage is unparalleled. Since these 3 pieces of trash can't beat you, why would I seek my own death? On the other hand, Ancestor, do you want me to help you? He sneered, "You are all my enemies anyway. But a fine bird chooses a tree to nest in." The old monster laughed. "At least you know what's good for you. Then little girl, who are you calling?" he said as he sent out another palm, hitting number 3's chest. The armor, which was already covered in spiderweb-like cracks, finally fell off completely, revealing the faint black body underneath. Number 3 was sent flying 2 to 3 miles away by his palm, smashing into a large group of monsters before barely getting up. But this time she wasn't in a hurry to dodge. She suddenly looked up to the sky and roared. When she spoke, it was a female voice. Even among ordinary people, it was quite pleasant to hear. Even though her body had grown to become taller than the monsters, and her appearance was fierce, there was still nothing unusual. But there was something else in this long roar. It was as if there was another ferocious beast hiding inside her body, and now, it had awakened from its slumber. This long roar stirred up a terrible gale, causing the waves around her to surge wildly in all directions. As for those monsters, in the midst of this wild roar and the sound of the waves, they turned into dust in an instant, as if they were made of flour and ashes. As they died, the power of the netherworld surged out of their bodies. But what was strange was that not only wasn't the black fog blown away, it instead flowed against the wind and gathered inside number 3's body. The 13 pairs of eyes on her head shot out blood-red light in unison, and she gnashed her teeth and shouted in a voice that was a mixture of a ferocious beast and a woman's voice, "Old thing, do you think that armor is there to protect me? It's there to restrain me." As soon as she said this, there was an explosion of fury as number 3's body actually appeared above the old monster's head and pounced down. Li Yunxin had expected that these 3 would have something up their sleeves. But he hadn't expected them to be so ferocious. Even with his eyesight, he couldn't clearly see number three's movement trajectory. It was unimaginably fast. Before the old monster could say another word, number three's fists had already arrived. Both the sea and the sky shook violently. Large swathes of rainbow-colored light burst forth between the two. It was as if several pairs of wings had sprouted from number three's back, and they pierced the sky with dazzling black light, even dispersing the thick black fog to reveal a blue sky. The old monster had killed them effortlessly earlier. But now he actually used all his strength. The black tentacles on his body formed a dense net to block number three's fists. Wave after wave of mystic rays were unleashed, forming an almost boundless light shield. Where the two met, the air exploded into roiling clouds of fire. Waves of air surged wildly in all directions, and in the blink of an eye, the bottom of the ocean could be seen. After a stalemate of 2 breaths, something strange happened again. With another 2 earth-shattering roars, number 0 and number 2, who had been knocked down by the old monster earlier, stood up again. The 13 pairs of eyes on their heads were also frighteningly red. Their voices had long since lost all human rationality, leaving only a naked bestial nature. And their standing posture was not upright like a human. Instead, they were on all fours like wild beasts. As soon as they stood up, 2 explosive sounds rang out in the air. The old monster had used all his strength to support the light escape to deal with number 3. But these 2 attacked from the bottom of the sea. The old monster only had time to gather a ball of light under his body. It was easily smashed by these 2 with the force of a thunderbolt. Then there was another mournful roar. It didn't come from the 3 but from the 10,000-year-old ancestor. Number 0 and number 2 grabbed the old monster's tree-like lower limbs and opened their mouths. Their mouths were full of sharp fangs, and they tore off the old monster's lower limbs like rotten meat. Then their bodies shook, and they were eaten. The old monster was in pain. The flame-like meridians in his body instantly turned dark red. As a result, the light shield above his head flickered and dimmed rapidly. As a result, number 3 pressed down again, his fists landing solidly on the old monster's head. With just one blow, the old monster was blasted straight into the bottom of the sea, creating a huge pit that gave off endless black light. Looking at the 10,000-year-old ancestor now, his tree-like body had actually shriveled up. The dim, fruit-like balls of light above his head flickered like candles in the wind, as if they would go out at any moment. The 3 monsters immediately climbed down from the edge of the pit, leaped up and opened their huge mouths to devour the old monster. But the old monster still had the strength to spare, and he summoned a dazzling light shield of restriction to block this joint attack. But the flames in his body dimmed even further as if they were embers. Number 0 and number 2 seemed to have completely lost their minds. Only number 3 still had some conscience. Seeing that the 3 people's joint attack was in a deadlock, number 3 yelled in a terrible voice, "Li Yunxin, help me." Standing in the air, Li Yunxin smiled, revealing his white teeth. "Sure." Chapter 786. His voice wasn't loud, but the 4 monsters heard him. This was because there were only 5 of them left on the surface of the ocean. There were originally a few hundred monsters left. However, number 3's roar destroyed all the remaining monsters. This was something that even the 10,000-year ancestor couldn't do. The netherworld energy in the hundreds of monsters was also divided by the 3 of them. Now they were like fierce beasts. They were huge and terrifyingly strong beasts. Li Yunxin finally knew why Di Gong could leave without worry. As soon as he responded, the monkey demon called out in his ear, "Now it's not fun anymore. That demon looks like he's dying. Humph, there's no point in asking me to kill him now." Li Yunxin laughed again. "Great sage, I'm not asking you to kill him now. I'm asking you to kill those 3. Those 3 seem to be stronger than the 10,000-year ancestor. Are you interested?" The monkey demon was stunned. "Are you serious?" He then said, "I'm not afraid. I'm fighting to my heart's content. As for you, the other 3 demons have a terrifying aura. If I get into a stalemate with them and they come to kill you, I'm not confident that I can stop them." Li Yunxin laughed coldly. "As the saying goes, when you're rich, you'll overflow. There's nothing to be afraid of those 3. If they could last in their current state, they wouldn't have to be in such a sorry state. Great sage, you can see that the 10,000-year ancestor is about to die. If that's the case, why are they in such a hurry to ask me for help? It's because they know that they can't last long. Let's make a bet. You kill one of them and fight with the other 2 for a while. In less than 15 minutes, they will show their true colors." The monkey demon was silent, like he was hesitating. Then he snorted, "I heard what you said to them earlier. You agreed to work together to subdue that old demon, but now you're betraying me. Forget it. You're a demon, that old thing is a demon, and those three are also demons. They look even more sinister and they're not anything good either. I'll just treat it as killing a demon. He wanted to nag for a while longer, but Li Yunxin had run out of patience. He pointed forward and shouted, "Go!" A ray of golden light shot out from his ear and grew with the wind. In the blink of an eye, the great sage had already revealed his golden body. He rode on an auspicious cloud, circled in mid-air, and took out the Rui Jingu Bang. In Li Yunxin's ears, his words could be considered polite. But now that he was free, he immediately revealed his ferocious nature. First, he glared at Li Yunxin with his fiery eyes of truth and shouted, "Demon! If you dare to call me old son out like this again next time, I'll make sure you pay with your life." Only after cursing did he turn to look at the four mountain-like monsters. Perhaps he felt that he was too young and didn't look imposing, so his tongue was like spring thunder as he shouted, "Grow, grow, 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 grow." In the blink of an eye, the monkey demon's body expanded, becoming as huge as the other four. The three people that Gong Di left behind should have known about the existence of this helper in Li Yunxin's ears. However, when he felt a terrifyingly strong aura appear in the sky and ocean, he was shocked. Number 3 was still conscious, and after the shock he was delighted. He shouted loudly, "Li Yunxin, tell this thing to attack from below." Before Li Yunxin could reply, the monkey demon shouted angrily, "Hey! Which demon dares to ask me to do something? Eat my rod." Before number 3 could figure out who the "take this" was directed at, the golden staff had already broken through the void with the force of wind and thunder, and was right on her head. Even with Li Yunxin's current realm, his ears felt numb from the loud sound. There were still some dark clouds lingering in the sky, but because of this strike they were all dispersed, revealing the rising sun of the East Sea. Next to the huge pit where the 10,000-year ancestor fell, there was an even bigger pit. Number 3 was smashed into the ground by the supreme monkey demon monkey who had been holding back for a long time. It seemed that it could not move at all. However, the 10,000-year-old ancestor had already seen through Li Yunxin's plan. He took the opportunity and suddenly exerted his strength. Only a fleeting light shield was left, and he escaped from the ground. The monkey demon was overjoyed that his strike was successful. He leaped up again and waved his rod to attack number 2. At this moment, number 2 and number 0 had lost their senses. Their instincts towards danger were much stronger than number 3's. Before the monkey demon's golden rod could reach him, he flew up and grabbed his head with his 4 claws. The battle between these powerful cultivators was not something that Li Yunxin could participate in. He couldn't even see how the two monsters got to the Monkey King. The only thing he could do was to protect himself and stay far away from the battle to ensure that he wouldn't be affected. The two monsters were extremely fast. Just by pouncing forward, they created a continuous series of explosions. Wherever they passed, they left 2 trails of fire clouds behind them. It was as if, when they moved, even the air was scorching. However, the monkey demon's figure disappeared in an instant, causing the two of them to pounce on empty air. Before they could find where he was, a golden light appeared behind number 2. It turned out that he had turned into a tiny swallow and was flying past number 2's ear. But now, the flying swallow suddenly increased in size and shouted, "Hit!" The golden cudgel seemed to have appeared out of thin air and smashed into number 2's head. It was even stronger than his first strike. Number 2's entire head was smashed into his body. His body paused in the air for a moment, and then fell to the ground. The monkey demon stepped on the auspicious cloud and laughed wildly, "Good, good, good. I've always thought that you were a coward, now I'm calling you a coward." But at the realm of these monsters, one strike was not enough to end their lives. When number 2 fell to the ground, number 3 had already struggled out of the deep pit and didn't look at number 2. He probably knew that number 2 wouldn't die. Instead, he shouted at Li Yunxin, "Li Yunxin, are you crazy?" She shouted while stopping number 0 who was about to pounce on him again. But number 0 had gone berserk at this time like a fierce beast. She had to spend a lot of effort to control him. The reason was that ancestor 10,000 years old ancestor, who had escaped before, had appeared again, beside Li Yunxin. His torn and devoured legs were growing rapidly, and the flame in his body was shining again. It seemed that he would recover soon. If Li Yunxin was really in cahoots with ancestor 10,000 years old ancestor, with the addition of this powerful monkey demon, the situation would be really bad. So even if they didn't have much time, she had to understand Li Yunxin's intention first so that number 2 would have time to recover from the serious injury. Li Yunxin stood on the cloud and sneered, I'm the crazy one to do this with you guys. You guys can't stay in this state for long and you have too many secrets. Even if I kill Ancestor 10,000 years old Ancestor here, I can't guarantee that you guys won't attack me after you get the Dragon Island. Take me away? You can only use this to fool children. Number 2's body slowly reacted. His neck wriggled and many tentacles quickly grew out. It looked like Ancestor 10,000 years old Ancestor. In just a short while, the head that was destroyed by the Monkey King grew back, but it still couldn't move for a while. Where are the people around you? Number 3 couldn't understand Li Yunxin's betrayal, at least at this time. Do you think this old monster will let them go? He will use them to threaten you. Do you think that if you stand on his side he will call them? Li Yunxin yawned. They have nothing to do with me. Number 3 was stunned. You see, it's actually very simple. Li Yunxin shook his head. Both you and the Patriarch are my enemies. However, I clearly know what the old Ancestor wants to do, but I have doubts about your motives. The two of you will also use those people to threaten me. The difference is that after you use them to threaten me, the possibility of you killing all of us is far higher than the one beside me. I've thought about it. Since I might die with them if I work with you, I might as well work with the Patriarch. At least they're dead and I'm still alive. After he said this, the entire place fell silent for a breath of time. Number 3 realized what the problem was. Before they came here, Gong Di had told them some things, mainly about Li Yunxin's past. From those things, even the slowest person could realize that Li Yunxin, who had always been known for being cold and cunning, had slowly started to care about some people in this world. Therefore, he should be able to reach some kind of compromise by starting with those people. But from the looks of it now, were they mistaken? He didn't seem to care about those people's lives at all. Or was everything he had done in this world for a long time just a disguise? Although the old devil beside Li Yunxin was not in human form, he seemed to be staring at him carefully at this time. But in fact he didn't need to look at him. He could directly pry into Li Yunxin's thoughts. So he realized that when he mentioned them, Lu Gongzan, the 9th young master, Bai Yunxin, Red Lady, and the others, he really meant what he said. The old devil could easily pry into Li Yunxin's feelings for them. As he knew before, Li Yunxin didn't have a bad impression of these people, and he even had some concerns about them. But when he talked about his decision, those concerns were all cut off. It was like a little toy that ordinary people liked on a daily basis. For example, a dagger, a jade pendant, a tank of koi fish. But these things were nothing more than toys. They could make people feel happy in leisure time, but when it came to life and death, they were not as important as one's own life. If he said to give them up, he could give them up without any qualms. The old devil realized that what Li Yunxin said was true. When he talked about what would happen next, he always put his own life first. Li Yunxin even had a reasonable understanding of this. The fleeting thought that the old devil spied on was, if I had a chance of winning, I could fight with these people. But this old devil's skill is too strong, and I have no confidence in winning against him. That being the case, why must I bring about my own destruction? It's better to temporarily sacrifice those people's lives in exchange for my life. I have enough wisdom. I can slowly wait and look for the right time, and then I will avenge them. So, it's better than everyone dying in vain. Life is only for the sake of self-preservation. The old devil was very satisfied with this idea. Chapter 787. Only then did he realize, if he didn't have the magical power to read his mind, he would have been deceived by the deep affection he showed in this world. At that time he would probably be like the 3 idiots in front of him, thinking that he had grasped his lifeline, only to be stabbed in the back by a knife. Thinking of this, the old monster laughed loudly. Wonderful! A wise man submits to circumstances. You are indeed a wise man. No wonder you can live in such a dangerous world for so long. When I had a long talk with you on Stone Mountain, I was very disappointed. I thought you must be an unparalleled hero on land. I didn't expect you to be so soft-hearted at that time. I heard. Speaking of this, he suddenly paused, showing a strange expression on his face. It seemed that he was not used to the word I. Then he laughed strangely. Ha! There is no you or me in this world. It's just a past appearance. I am me. I was me in the past, and now I am also me. Ah! Hearing his strange laughter, Li Yunxin was a little relieved. The old monster's avatar was quite arrogant in Penglai, but now that he met him again he became more rational. He thought there was some change, but now he knew that the old monster was still the old monster. He was indeed not the old ancestor of 10,000 years in the past. But when he thought of the word in the past, His heart inexplicably palpitated, as if he had lost something in his body. However, this feeling flashed through his mind like a fleeting light and soon disappeared in the vast sea of consciousness. He frowned slightly but soon forgot this slight unhappiness. He raised his voice, "Ancestor, let's deal with these people first, then we can talk. Great sage." Even as he uttered these words, he heard the dreadful sound of the tide again. The previous battle between the 5 super-strong masters had stirred up waves that pushed away the seawater in this part of the sea. Now that the battle had stopped, the seawater that was pushed away came back. Hundreds of meters tall waves roared over from all directions, carrying dead bodies of aquatic creatures in the sea. Tens of miles long aquatic grasses grew on the bottom of the sea. Looking at them, Ji Hao felt that there were countless monsters hiding in those grasses. However, the great sage didn't reply. Instead, someone else did. Zero, who had already lost his mind, suddenly had a terrifying red glow in his eyes. Originally he was like a beast on all fours, but now he was standing up like a human. It was as if some kind of power had temporarily restrained her wild nature, allowing her to speak. However, the voice that came from her body was Grandmaster D's. "Li Yunxin, what the hell are you doing?" Li Yunxin raised his hand and used his will to stop the monkey demon in midair. "So you've already returned to Cloud Mountain?" "I just arrived at Cloud Mountain and I saw you do something stupid." Zero's consciousness was almost controlled by Grandpa D. His limbs were stiff, but his voice was vivid as if he was speaking. "Have you thought about your escape route when you joined forces with him? The escape route for the people around you?" Li Yunxin sat high in the clouds and laughed loudly. "Ah. Number 3 asked me that just now. Can't you think of something new?" His expression turned cold again. "The people around me? Which people? Why should I think of an escape route for them?" Grandmaster D was stunned. After a while he said, "The old demon around you won't let them go. Don't you care about them?" Li Yunxin curled his lips. "You're crazy. Why should I care about them?" "I get it. Do you have some misunderstanding about me?" He sighed. "Do you think that just because I've done something for them and saved their lives a few times, I'll put their lives above mine? Wake up, my friend. It's human nature to survive. Everything we do is to make our lives easier and happier. In the past, I treated them well because it made me happy. You see, it is to be kind to them and to gain their gratitude that pleases me and not the other way round." He sneered. "But if the priority is reversed, I'll be stupid if I put myself in a situation where I'll die for them. People are born to only care about themselves. That's human nature. You've lived for so long. Can't you think about this?" Grandmaster D's voice sounded almost immediately. He sounded very indignant. "Human nature. This is called animal nature. The so-called human nature is different from this kind of animal nature that only cares about itself. Human nature makes people know how to give up and sacrifice themselves for others." F***C. Li Yunxin spread his hands and turned to look at Ancestor 10,000 years. "This idiot just told me that he knows a guy who has boundless love and sacrifices himself for others. He said that guy has a problem with his brain. Now he's talking to me about human nature. Ancestor, kill them." Grandmaster D immediately shouted, "If you don't think about the people around you, think about your netherworld." Li Yunxin sneered. "This is exactly what you should think about. After a while, about 15 minutes later, we'll kill you 3 monsters. Then, Ancestor will want to open the entrance to the netherworld and turn this land into the netherworld. At that time, you and the people on Mount Yunshan won't be able to leave this place and will have to stay in this world. Do you prefer a world like this or a land of death filled with the netherworld? So, I'm not asking you to limit the netherworld aura to this sea area. It's you, if you still have some brains, who should act now to seal this place and not let it spread out that way. Although Ancestor will still find a way to destroy Mount Yunshan and remove the restriction here after he succeeds, you'll finally have a chance to breathe. Grandmaster D, take your brain with you and do what you should do." After saying this, he waved his hand. "Great sage. Kill the 3 of them." But at this time, Grandmaster D didn't speak, but Ancestor 10,000 years spoke. The huge waves that had gathered from all directions finally collided with one another, causing the air to be filled with mist and a loud noise. However, the huge beings in the field didn't move at all, completely ignoring this unimaginably terrible impact. In this loud noise, Ancestor 10,000 years Ancestor's voice was imprinted in Li Yunxin's mind. "Before we act, I have one thing to do. You should know." Before Li Yunxin opened his mouth to speak, this thought flashed through his mind quickly and was seen by the old monster beside him. He saw me plotting against Grandmaster D and those three useless things. He also remembered that I used to be famous for my resourcefulness on land. He must be afraid of me. He's afraid that I'll betray him again during the battle and attack him. Ah, that's more like it. Otherwise, what would it look like? Those who aren't afraid of me, Li Yunxin, are idiots. He probably wants to place some kind of restriction on me. To think of this matter only now, it can be considered as an insult to me. But it's best to think of a way to make him give up on this idea. Once I'm put on a restriction by someone of his realm, it'll be difficult for me to break it with my current power. Alas, what can I think of? This old monster is so unpredictable, he might even turn hostile. Forget it. When have I ever done things my way? Let's wait and see. These thoughts flashed through his mind in the blink of an eye. Even he himself did not have the time to organize these words. However, Ancestor 10,000 years had seen through his thoughts and felt even more satisfied. He imprinted the second sentence in his mind. I admire people who know when to advance and when to retreat. You can rest assured. People like you are exactly what I want to use. As long as you don't cause trouble, how can I bear to destroy such a fine jade like you? As soon as he finished speaking, Li Yunxin suddenly felt something in his mind. I'll put a restriction on your divine sense, Ancestor 10,000 years said in a deep voice. The 10,000-year-old ancestor said in a deep voice, the moment you have any devious thoughts, this restriction will destroy your mind. At that time, you won't exist in this world and I'll only have your body to use. It'll be a pity for both you and me. So, don't do anything stupid. Okay. Now you go and clean up those three bastards. These conversations only happened in an instant. Even the water mist caused by the huge waves was still rising. When Li Yunxin realized that the Ancestor 10,000 years had really put a restriction on him, it only took him a moment to think about it. But since things had already come to this, there was no point in thinking too much. Not to mention that he had already expected this. Thus he only smiled faintly. Then as the ancestor wishes. Great sage. This was the third time he called the Monkey King to make a move. While they were confronting each other, the Monkey King only stood in the air, carrying the Rui Jingu Bang on his shoulder. The two pairs of feathers on his head didn't move at all, giving off a transcendent appearance. When he heard the third call, he just lazily put down the golden rod and glanced at Li Yunxin. Who are you now? Li Yunxin was startled, then he raised his eyebrows. Do it. But the Monkey King smiled coldly. When I, old son, first came, you weren't like this. At that time, although you were a demon, you were still somewhat human. But now. He also raised his eyebrows and shouted sternly, you've all become demons. Li Yunxin narrowed his eyes and stared at him for a while, then he said coldly, it seems that I gave you some face in the past. You're so arrogant that you don't know whose words count between us. Now let me remind you again, he said coldly, you were summoned by me. Before I summoned you, you didn't exist in this world. In the past, I said that you and I were bound by life and death, and I tolerated and coaxed you because I had a good impression of you in my previous life. But if you have the illusion that you can turn from guest to host because of this, I think you should understand another thing. I can refine the godly weapons into my body and I can also take them out. Or, I can refine myself into the netherworld body, and I can refine you into my current appearance. At that time, you'll just be a monkey demon. Without your mind and consciousness, your actions, sitting and sleeping will all be under my control. Let me ask you again, do you want to fight? Chapter 788. The Monkey King's body emitted a terrifying aura. The pair of feathers on his head seemed to have turned into iron, and his fiery golden eyes shone brightly. He looked at Li Yunxin from top to bottom and suddenly smiled. The ferocious aura on his body disappeared. This change caused everyone present to be slightly shocked. But the next moment, the monkey demon shouted, Fine. I'll do what you want. Watch out. After this thunderous roar, he swung his cudgel at number 2, who had just recovered and was about to stand up. They fought. At this moment, the voice of the 10,000-year ancestor sounded in Li Yunxin's consciousness again. You can't use your assistant anymore? Li Yunxin was also confused. Because what the 10,000-year ancestor said was the truth. In the past, the monkey demon would also bicker and be reluctant. But as long as Li Yunxin wanted to, he couldn't resist. The monkey demons couldn't resist, didn't mean that he didn't want to, but his body moved. Instead, if there was an analogy, it was very similar to the principle of drug addiction. For example, a person who was addicted to smoking. He knew that smoking was harmful to his health and others. But when he was addicted to smoking and wanted to smoke, the desire seemed to really become his. He couldn't control himself and took out another cigarette. But in fact, because the concentration of the poison in his body had decreased, his brain developed a strong desire for something that could replenish the poison. A person's thoughts were all controlled by his brain. In a sense, he didn't have independent will. The brain is just a part of my body, not me. This was actually a huge illusion. Therefore, this desire controlled his mind and made him feel that he wanted. Li Yunxin's life was intertwined with the Monkey King, so it was like this to control the Monkey King. Even if the monkey demon didn't want to make a move a moment ago, he felt that he wanted to make a move as soon as Li Yunxin thought about it. He would always find excuses such as, I don't want to lower myself to his level, or, it's fun to challenge the strong. However, even though Li Yunxin had ordered him to attack 3 times, the monkey demon did not act immediately. This meant that his mental power didn't work on the monkey demon, at least it didn't work that well. When the 10,000-year ancestors question appeared in Li Yunxin's mind, he immediately had such a thought. What the hell? What's going on? There were no problems in the past. What went wrong? Because I refined myself into the netherworld? No, that's not the reason. There seemed to be a problem somewhere. Somewhere? Why can't I remember? Damn it. Could it be that refining the netherworld has the effect of lowering one's intelligence? I'm a genius? No. I've refined his life into my own, so there's no way anything could go wrong. It should be because of the netherworld energy in his body. Yes, netherworld chi. It interferes with the flow of thoughts between him and me. Forget it. Although it's not very useful, at least it can still be used. But since this thing isn't useful anymore, if I keep him by my side, this old demon will be afraid. I might as well take this opportunity to get rid of him. What a pity. After these thoughts flashed through his mind, he managed to form a sentence. Something must have gone wrong in his mind. The 10,000-year ancestor laughed in his mind. Forget it. I know what you're thinking now. Am I the kind of master who can't tolerate others? If you think this monkey demon is still useful, then keep him for yourself. Just watch over him. Another thought flashed through Li Yunxin's mind. The 10,000-year ancestor laughed again. Aha, that's right. In the future you'll know that I'm not just quite magnanimous. Li Yunxin sighed softly. He really didn't need to say anything else. His thoughts were completely exposed in front of the old demon. There was no way he could hide anything from him. After the old demon said these words, the great sage struck out a second time. Grandmaster D seemed to have given control of his body to Zero. Once they sensed the Monkey King's attack, the 3 monsters immediately attacked together. The great sage was a Grand Supreme Realm expert, but the 3 monsters were also Grand Supreme Realm experts. 3 against 1, even if the Monkey King had some tricks and divine weapons, it gradually showed signs of losing. Not to mention Grand Supreme Realm experts, even in a battle between Profound Realm experts, as long as one side wanted to escape, they could usually survive. However, this Monkey King seemed to be ordered by Li Yunxin to fight to the death here without retreating. After a dozen or so breaths, it was finally hit by number 2 with all its strength. For the first time it spat out a mouthful of blood. However, the monkey demon flew back dozens of feet, then suddenly stopped. It spat out the remaining blood in its mouth and shouted, "Awesome! Awesome! Again!" Then it pounced again. Li Yunxin and the 10,000-year ancestor stood high in the clouds. There was no sadness or happiness on their faces, as if the battle not far away had nothing to do with them. The 3 monsters attacked Li Yunxin together, probably because they were afraid of the 10,000-year ancestor. The 10,000-year ancestor looked at it and said with a smile, "I'm afraid that helper of yours is going to lose." Li Yunxin only said coldly, "I was meant to be used." As they spoke, the monkey demon fought with the 3 monsters hundreds of times, but still couldn't gain the upper hand. At this moment, the 3 monsters suddenly rushed into the sky and stopped moving. They formed a triangle. Number 2 was at the top, and number 0 and number 3 were below. Perhaps they had used some kind of formation, but in an instant, the 3 of them were surrounded by light. A circular halo appeared outside the triangle. Under this halo, many tiny tentacles of light quickly grew out. Looking at those tentacles now, they were shockingly similar to the old devils. They quickly spread and entangled in one place. In the end, between the sea and the sky, an incomparably huge tree of light was formed. It was extremely similar to the old devil's current appearance. Li Yunxin was shocked. He realized that there must be some secret behind this appearance. In the cultivation of Taoist techniques, there was a saying that different paths lead to the same destination. It couldn't be a coincidence that the tree of light formed by the three monsters was similar to the old devil's appearance. It should be, as if, their power had already touched upon some kind of origin, which was why they were shockingly similar. He deduced that the power of the three monsters wouldn't last for long. Now that he saw them use this method, he said in a low voice, "Their peak state should be over soon. As long as he can hold on for a little longer." The he mentioned was naturally the Monkey King. If the Monkey King was at his peak state, he would definitely destroy the three monsters before they could form a formation. But now he was in a sorry state. After fighting hundreds of times, he had suffered several serious injuries, and the golden armor on his body was already damaged. Thus, his speed and power were not as good as before. When he rushed into the sky, the tree of light had already taken shape. However, he had no intention of avoiding the battle and shouted, "Eat my staff." Chapter 789. This strike was aimed at Zero, who was at the bottom of the formation. However, the fierce and terrifying strike was blocked when it was dozens of feet away from her. Suddenly, countless lights and shadows appeared and disappeared around the light tree. The lights and shadows changed very quickly. They weren't exactly shapes but more like patterns. But when one looked at those patterns, one would have an illusion that they were boundless and contained everything. All rules, order, and even things that didn't exist in this world or in the universe were included in them. However, this kind of pattern was just one of the most inconspicuous patterns among the countless patterns of life and death. When the Monkey King struck with his rod, the golden rod suddenly appeared behind him, above his head and under his feet. Even countless shadows that looked like him appeared at the same time and surrounded him. There was a loud rumble. The rod didn't hit Zero but hit himself. The unparalleled hero, the invincible Demon King, fell and sank to the bottom of the sea. The old demon's expression changed. He didn't even have the mood to use his magical power. He asked first, "What is this?" Then he asked, "Is your assistant dead?" The monkey demon suffered a heavy blow, and the injury was also returned to Li Yunxin. His face was as pale as paper. He gritted his teeth and said, "Not yet." Before he finished speaking, he spat out a mouthful of golden blood. But before the golden blood fell into the sea, the surface of the sea rippled again. The great sage jumped out of the water and stood on the surface of the sea. He didn't look at the light tree and the monster in the sky. He only held the golden rod and stared at Li Yunxin. "So, are you satisfied?" But the armor on his body was broken, revealing the demon body underneath. The demon body was soaked by the sea water, looking pitiful and embarrassed. The 10,000-year ancestor knew that the monkey demon's injury was so serious that it couldn't be any worse. With a great divine ability, it was as easy and natural as breathing. But the moment he was hit, even the seawater couldn't be expelled. Li Yunxin looked at him for a breath and waved his hand. The monkey demon turned into a golden light and went into his ear. Then he became silent. The old demon beside him said, "Your assistant knows how to do his best. If it were me, I would treat him well." Li Yunxin took a deep breath. "It's just for use." The old monster laughed strangely. "This time you don't mean what you say. Good, now let me meet them." The old devil's current cultivation might be higher than a great sage, but it was limited. However, the reason why he wanted to charge forward and fight so heroically was because the tree of light in the sky had changed again. Li Yunxin's guess was correct. As expected, the three monsters couldn't last long. After the Monkey King was seriously injured, the light tree started to show signs of defeat. Just like the 10,000-year-old ancestor who had suffered a heavy blow, the light quickly dimmed. The halo behind the three of them flickered, like a lamp that was about to break. They probably knew that they couldn't drag on any longer, so they used this ultimate move. By the time the old devil reached the sky, the tree of light was already dispersing faster and faster. Number 3, who was still conscious, gritted his teeth and shouted, "Take you away again, demon." But although her words were harsh, the power began to quickly fade from her and the other two monsters' bodies. The tree of light finally shook, turned into a stream of light and dissipated. The three huge bodies in the sky fell into the sea. At this time the old devil shouted, "Hee, I'm afraid you're the ones who will die." He didn't move at all. Only a black light flashed between the three, and a waterfall of blood sprayed down from the sky. The old devil used his chi to attack again. The three bodies were all thrown into the sea, and the bottom of the sea was blasted out again. Li Yunxin was seriously injured and couldn't see the bottom of the sea clearly. He could only see the old devil's huge body landing next to them, absorbing all the netherworld chi in their bodies. The huge body quickly withered, turning into a mummy with only skin and bones. But for some reason the old devil stopped in his tracks. He stared at the three motionless bodies for a while, then let out a creepy laugh. Hee hee. I see, Li Yunxin, come here. Li Yunxin sighed and slowly flew over. He heard the old devil shout again. Hee hee. I won't kill this person, you kill him. He was close now and finally saw the situation clearly. Three withered bodies were lying on the bottom of the sea, like three stretching mountains. But at the end of the mountain range formed by number three's body, under her huge head, where the neck used to be, slowly a human figure appeared. It was the size of a normal person, as if it was spat out by the body. Li Yunxin moved forward a bit more and saw the person's face clearly. He also finally realized why he felt that number three's tone was a little familiar. It was Xian Shilio. He froze for a moment, then landed on the body and stood next to Xian Shilio. The woman was naked, and there were still tentacle-like things on her limbs, head, and back that were connected to the huge body. It seemed that they had been fused with the body, and her mind had been controlling it. During the battle on Cloud Mountain, Xian Shilio's and Lu Ling's bodies were taken away by Su Yusong. Later, Red Lady, who had obtained the dragon soul and advanced to the peak of the profound realm, threatened Su Yusong with Zhuomuji's life and asked him to throw away all his treasures. Their bodies, which were trapped in the restriction, were also among those treasures. After that, he didn't know what happened to them. But now, Li Yunxin realized, it was time for the elders on Cloud Mountain to make use of the waste and refine this thing. It was indeed making the best use of it. The Freemasonry's method of refining souls was brilliant. This kind of cultivator's body was perfect for it. It could erase her memory and turn her into a new tool. Although her memory was gone, some of her temperament was still there. Number three's lively appearance. Wasn't it Xian Shilio's demeanor in the past? Then he remembered that Xian Shilio used to love him a lot. As soon as he thought of this, the old devil laughed strangely. Yes, I know a little about what happened to you on the land. Ah, it's fate that you met her today. If you want to submit to me, kill her for me to see. I want to see you. Before he finished speaking, Xian Shilio suddenly opened her eyes. The first person she saw was Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin was also looking down at her. At this time, the ocean water that had been blasted away earlier rolled back with a rumble, and even the bottom of the sea shook violently because of the loud noise. In the background, Xian Shilio suddenly widened her eyes and opened her mouth to say something. Li Yunxin didn't hear what she said. She tried to raise her hand again as if she wanted to touch the corner of Li Yunxin's clothes. But the latter gently flicked his finger. The slender body immediately exploded into a ball of blood. Chapter 790. The old monster froze for a moment, then laughed again. Wonderful. Your ruthless nature is really wonderful. I'm just helping her out. Li Yunxin said expressionlessly. Things that have been refined by those people are no longer the original person. The old monster stared at him with interest. I heard that this girl used to love you. Li Yunxin sneered, interrupted his words and fled to another body. She loves me, what does that have to do with me? After saying this, he landed on Zero's neck. He stared at the naked body that was also spat out for a while and whispered, sure enough. This one was Lu Ling. He flicked his finger again, killing the refined Lu Ling before he could regain consciousness. At this time the old monster was silent. He seemed to be more interested in Li Yunxin. After a while, when Li Yunxin came to the second body, she only whispered, I don't know this one. Then she crushed the skull of the naked youth. She said, this old man thought that you would have some feelings of friendship in your heart. I didn't expect that when you killed these two girls, your heart was as still as water, without a trace of pity. Li Yunxin flew high into the sky before the giant waves crashed into one place. She said indifferently, that's why I'm able to live in this world until now. I didn't die here like them. Should we go to Penglai now? At this time the giant waves surged under them, and there were countless huge whirlpools. Each one was enough to swallow a village. But above them there was a blue sky with a few floating clouds. It was hard for anyone to imagine that just a few hours ago, there was black fog rolling like a ghost town on earth. The old monster didn't move. He seemed to look at Li Yunxin again and suddenly said, Bah! You're even more ruthless than me, you're really not human. Li Yunxin frowned. Isn't that you? However, the old monster knew what he was thinking and scolded, I am moody, so what? Do you know what an expert is? A true expert has the right to judge everyone in the world, but no one can judge him. Even though this old man is equally heartless, I still insist on scolding you. What can you do about it? Li Yunxin sighed. It's up to you. Just don't delay our business. The old devil scolded again. You are my dog now, but you are even more impatient than me? Why is it this slave again? I will tear you apart alive. As he cursed, he really stretched out his tentacles and bound Li Yunxin tightly. Then he exerted great strength. Li Yunxin was seriously injured. Fortunately, he had used the divine weapon to modify his body, making him extremely strong. The old devil's tentacles exerted their strength, but they were unable to tear him apart. Only now did he realize that this old killer really wanted to kill him, but why? He was shocked and was about to say something, but the tentacles suddenly retracted. He immediately retreated dozens of feet away and shouted angrily, "Are you King crazy?" The tree-like old devil stood silently in the air for a while before speaking. But his tone was much gentler. Just now it was just the inner demon acting up. It's fine. Li Yunxin frowned. The old devil immediately said, You're smart. That's right. I refined the netherworld, leaving behind some hidden dangers. In times of danger my mind is still normal. But when the danger is gone, the netherworld demon power in my body will act up. Ah, you think so too? Indeed. I am also worried that this so-called inner demon will turn into another consciousness in my body. But I can still control it now. I will slowly refine it after we get the Dragon Island. The inner demon that the old devil mentioned was something that Li Yunxin suddenly realized just now. The 10,000-year-old ancestor that appeared in Penglai was almost completely irrational. But in the previous battle he became smart and calm. And just now he suddenly wanted to kill him as if he had lost his mind. This meant that the power in this old ancestor's body was unstable. After all, his current body was refined from the skeleton in the sea cave and the netherworld demon power that gushed out from the ground. And that skeleton originally had a consciousness. Should be. Even if he refined it for 40,000 years, he still couldn't completely erase the consciousness and still left some marks in his body. Once the 10,000-year-old ancestor's mind relaxed, those consciousnesses would float, causing his temperament to change greatly. Damn. This is 1,000 times more dangerous than a pure temperamental. The old devil obviously didn't want to talk about himself. He quickly changed the topic. You said that the netherworld array that Cloud Mountain wants to create, why hasn't there been any movement? Li Yunxin looked at him from afar for a while, then cautiously said, Don't you like it more? Bah. The old devil spat. How can this old man be afraid of trouble? Instead of always being on guard against those people, it's better to do it this time. 40,000 years ago. When this old man saw Cloud Mountain on the sea, I swore in my heart that I would make it mine. Now is the right time to take a look at their divine ability, then kill them. Li Yunxin reminded him, I'm afraid that at that time, it will take even more effort. I previously taught Grandmaster D how to control. The old devil laughed strangely. I know what you're thinking. You want to tell this old man that you now know how to control Dragon Island and how to use Cloud Mountain to control the earth energy between heaven and earth. So you want to make this old man even more reluctant to kill you. You've become so timid now? Just because of my attack just now? There's a difference between being timid and being cautious. Li Yunxin said, Old ancestor, you better think of a way to guarantee my safety. I mean, the current you is naturally rational and won't want to kill me. But when the heart demon flares up, you can't control it. If you kill me, it will ruin your great plan. You want to become the god of the netherworld, so you don't want your great plan to fail at the last step. As far as I'm concerned, it's not worth dying in vain. The old devil smiled. Just as he was about to speak, an extremely subtle change suddenly occurred between the sea and the sky. It was still the turbid and whistling seawater and the blue sky. But there seemed to be something else in the air, causing their eardrums to swell slightly. Soon after, they felt that their connection with the whole world was cut off by something. This kind of connection was actually an extremely subtle thing. In this world, things like divination and prophecy did indeed exist. But it was useless for cultivators, but it was very useful for mortals. With a certain method, a method that Li Yunxin didn't understand the details of, one could temporarily peep into a person's fate. He believed that this was because some of the laws of this world were different. At their level of cultivation, in the words of mortals, the great Tao of heaven and earth flowed together. Thus, they could often sense some subtle connections in the world. This connection wasn't limited to distance or time. Now, it was precisely this thing that had been cut off. Li Yunxin's expression turned cold at first, but soon after he felt relieved and said in a low voice, Grandmaster D has taken out this restriction. But I don't know how big it is. Chapter 791. But the old monster opened his mouth. Not too big, not too small either. The entire 9 seas are included in it. In that case you're sure to get him. The old monster didn't have a head. But Li Yunxin slowly realized that the black ball of light at the tip of the tentacles, on top of his head, seemed to have some visual perception. Because if the old monster intended to look at him, the tentacles would turn around and point the ball of light at him. At first he was puzzled, thinking that with the old monster's current magical power, using the divine sense to perceive things was definitely much clearer and more subtle than using eyesight. But then he thought that no matter how the divine sense perceived, there were still some things that couldn't be perceived, such as color. This old monster was originally from the land world, but later fled to the ocean. After being trapped in the sea for 40,000 years, he wanted to go to the land to have a look. This was probably the reason why he had such superfluous eyesight. I'm sure of getting him because he's afraid of death. Afraid of death and timid. Li Yunxin said, this kind of person thinks he's smart, but in fact he's the easiest to deal with. If he had a little bit of courage, he wouldn't have hidden in Yunshan for 40,000 years without any achievements. He's not even as good as you, who started from scratch and achieved what you have today. The old monster snorted, not caring if the flattery was sincere or not. You said you taught him the method of setting up the prohibition. How long can it last? It's not a question of how long. Li Yunxin smiled proudly. This method is something I came up with. I guess in this world only a genius like me can do this. This prohibition is as old as heaven and earth. He lost something. He still didn't know, but his personality became more lively. It was like when he first entered the city of Wei. Now that he was talking under the blue sky, he was even more spirited, as if the old monster beside him wasn't a scary monster, but a mortal. He waved his hand heroically. The netherworld energy can even corrode the body of a cultivator. It's hard to find anything in this world that can control it. And if you really want to use something to encircle such a large sea, it's impossible with the manpower of this world. So I used the method of nature. Although the netherworld chi is many times more tyrannical than the spiritual chi of heaven and earth, it is still very little compared to the total amount of spiritual chi in this world. For example, using a divine ability to summon a gale could lift up a boulder. If the huge amount of spiritual chi in the world was gathered around this sea, it would become even stronger than the netherworld chi. It's like how a handful of loose sand can't stop the flow of water, but if you build a mud dam, you can stop the stream. In fact, in order to surround the 9 seas with an extremely rich spiritual power barrier, the spiritual chi used is only an insignificant part of the total amount of spiritual chi between heaven and earth. Li Yunxin sneered. That idiot Gong Di thought he could trap us here together. However, he did not know that no matter how dense the spiritual power inside the barrier was, it was not as dense as the chi activity of a cultivator who had undergone refinement. This restriction doesn't work on humans. He said all this in high spirits. The old devil was silent for a while. Then he said, You are really strange. Now that I see your thoughts, I know that you are wholeheartedly loyal to me. Naturally, I also know that you are still thinking of an opportunity in the future to escape from my control. However, people who are being coerced will always be a little unwilling, but you have almost no grudges in your heart. He paused again, then said, You should know. If you beg me properly, those people on Penglai, Lu Gongzan and the others, can live. Li Yunxin smiled. Old ancestors should be the same kind of person as me. You should know that people like us are different from the vast majority of people in the world. The vast majority of people in the world, even the vast majority of people who are full of evil, carry a thing called responsibility. This thing is like a tentacle growing on their bodies. They slowly walk through the human world, and these tentacles slowly pull many people and many things onto their bodies and backs. Those people can't get rid of this tentacle called responsibility, so they have to carry the burden forward. And in this painful process they find joy in the pain, saying that after a hard day outside, they will not return home empty-handed, and that they will be happy if they can feed and clothe their wives and children. He was merely deceiving himself under the heavy pressure of responsibility. Watching others eat and wear warm clothes, how can it be as happy as enjoying oneself? The old devil seemed to find this new and interesting, so he said, According to you, everyone in the world is stupid? Li Yunxin shook his head. Quite the opposite. The tentacles on those people's bodies pull lonely individuals closer to each other, and that's how the complicated relationships of the society are formed. In this society, Everyone has to suffer for their own responsibility so that the society can progress and people can suffer less and less. Old ancestor, think about it, at the beginning of the world people ate raw meat and drank blood. At that time, people had to carry the value of their lives, and they had to keep their wives and children alive. So they slowly formed tribes. At that time they were no longer afraid of fierce beasts, so they could settle down, farm, eat more and wear warmer clothes. Because of this, the human race has become what it is today, dominating the midland, forcing the evil beasts to retreat into the forests. It is also in this kind of society, a society where everyone carries responsibility, that people like you and I can live happily. Because for you and me, things like responsibility are not as important as ourselves. For the people or things that one cares about, one has to suffer, one has to compromise. But for people like you and me, we can just throw them away and we won't hurt ourselves. Everything we do, we only do for our own good. The more we have no bottom line and no responsibility, the happier we can live in this world. You told me that if I begged you, Lu Gongzan and the others would be able to live. Li Yunxin smiled. I'm afraid that old ancestor has some misunderstanding about me. Before, when I was on the land, I protected them because that kind of feeling could make me happy. For example, a person doesn't like sour taste. But one day, if a sour fruit that he had never seen before was placed in front of him, he would probably try it. Not because tasting it made him happy, but because tasting it made him happy. I have never experienced family, friendship, or love before. So I wanted to try it, not because of these feelings that made me happy, but because of the process of trying it. I also tried it, there was a feeling of tentacles on my back. But this kind of trying has a limit. Li Yunxin said seriously, in your place, I don't want to try even a little bit. Before, I knew that there were a few grand elders in this world, but back then my cultivation was too low and I didn't know how powerful they were. Later, when I became stronger and stronger, I found that those so-called grand elders on the land were just empty shells. Now, I met you on the sea and realized that in front of absolute power, tricks have no chance of winning. Since the chance of winning is zero, and they are not people that I can't abandon, why should I carry those people on my back? I might as well kill them all. I can also try the happiness of being alone again. This kind of happiness is what makes me happy. The old devil seemed to be thinking about something. He said, all right. I would like to see if you are as decisive as you said when you kill them with your own hands. If you are, then you are truly a genius in this world. Chapter 792. After saying that, he no longer looked at Li Yunxin. Instead, his body shook and suddenly shrunk to the size of an ordinary person. His appearance also changed to that of an ordinary person. He was a robust man with a round waist and thick back. He wore a black Taoist robe that fluttered like a black fog. Li Yunxin smiled. Is this what ancestor used to look like? The old monster ignored him and said, follow them. Then he flew up and wanted to shoot into the distance. But Li Yunxin immediately stopped him. Ancestor, please wait. I still have something to say. The old monster's face turned cold. What is it? About what to do when we go to Penglai. Li Yunxin looks up into the distance. She can see a little white light on the horizon. It is the reflection of Penglai Island under the scorching sun in its true form. Although the monsters had surrounded Penglai Island, they were huge in size and large in number. The area they occupied in the sea was larger than 7 or 8 Penglai Islands. Li Yunxin and Red Lady killed their way to the back of those demons, but they were already very far away from Penglai Island. If it wasn't for his good eyesight, he could probably only see the sea mist. Now that Qingshui has occupied Dragon Island and Penglai, she can detect a lot of movements in the surroundings. For example, she can hear almost everything around Penglai. Li Yunxin said seriously, since we are far away, let's discuss what to do first. The old monster frowned and said impatiently, just kill them. What can Qingshui do to me? Ancestor, do you remember the thing that injured you when your avatar was in the sky above Penglai Island? The old monster sneered, nothing to be afraid of. Now that my real body is here, that kind of power can at most injure me, but it can't kill me. I know this. But it's not to warn Ancestor, it's to lure out Qingshui. Li Yunxin raised his hand and pointed, we can see Penglai, Fanghu, and Yingzhou on the surface of the ocean. But Ancestor, have you seen the Dragon Island in these 4 years except for the first time? The old monster didn't say anything. Li Yunxin then said, I have been to the Dragon Island. Therefore he knew that the thing was usually not in this world but in some other space. We killed our way over. Qingshui knew we couldn't defeat them, so he hid inside and refused to come out. If things were delayed, things might change. She could use that thing to get in touch with the people in the netherworld. If we don't restrain her with lightning speed, trouble will come. Therefore we have to lure her out first. The old devil frowned and thought for a moment. What do you have in mind? Sorry to make you my captive, patriarch. I will tell her that I have you, and she will come to see you. My alliance with her is only temporary, and I know that she still has some tricks up her sleeve, and has a way out for herself. She must want you very much. The old devil immediately laughed strangely. You want me? To be exact, I want the netherworld chi in your body. Li Yunxin smiled faintly. Ancestor, do you know why I was able to refine myself into the netherworld body in such a short time? It's because when I fought with the first demon, I was not its match. However, Qin Shui used up her own energy and gathered the spiritual energy between the sea and the sky to protect me, helping me defeat it. I was also able to succeed with the help of the spiritual energy. But Ancestor is very curious, why did she do this? The old devil glared at him. Stop talking nonsense. Li Yunxin spread his hands and realized that the person in front of him wasn't Lu Gongzan. He wouldn't be his sidekick. He could only smile. Ancestor, don't be anxious. It's like this. When I was fighting with that devil, the devil could use the netherworld chi that escaped from its body to heal itself. Qin Shui then injected rich spiritual energy into its body, causing the energy inside the monster to become chaotic, so it couldn't continue fighting with me. You should know that Taoist Qin Shui was originally painted by the painting saint, an incarnation of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. She injected spiritual energy into the monster's body, but in fact she injected a part of herself into it. By doing this, she made me feel that she was sincerely helping me, and also found a way out for herself under my nose. I guess she would pretend to die in my hands at some point in the future. Then she would borrow a corpse to resurrect herself and resurrect on the remains of the monster. This is a very clever method. She can deceive others and escape from all troubles. Unfortunately, I have used this method before and felt a little puzzled at that time. It wasn't until just now that I suddenly understood. Since she wants to refine herself into a nether body as well, and the nether chi in this place is gone, she'll definitely set her sights on you. The old devil was a smart person. He frowned and thought for a while before asking, what you said is true. But why does Qin Shui also want to refine the netherworld body? I guess it's because she wants to go to the netherworld. Li Yunxin sneered. She cares about the painting saint and wants to find her. But because of this, she doesn't want to destroy the world that the painting saint left on earth. We want to refine the netherworld to become the lord of the netherworld on earth. As for Qin Shui, she only wants to do half of it. The old devil was silent for a breath's time as if he was prying into Li Yunxin's thoughts. Although his tone was arrogant, he became cautious when it came to the time to land on the island. He had seen the might of the Dragon Island and the Cloud Mountain 40,000 years ago, so he wouldn't have the slightest bit of fear. Thus, after confirming that what Li Yunxin said was true and that Li Yunxin sincerely wanted to help him seize the Dragon Island, he said, "Fine." Li Yunxin smiled. Then I'll have to trouble old Ancestor to be bound by these chains. After he finished speaking, he raised his hand and a misty green chain appeared in his palm. Then he willed the soul-reaping chain to slowly attach itself to the 10,000-year-old ancestor's body. The old devil slightly frowned and raised his hands and legs. He realized that although this magic treasure was very powerful, it wasn't enough to lock him down and make him unable to move. He snorted. Let's go. Li Yunxin waved his big sleeves and turned into a ray of white light as he flew into the distance. Although he was heavily injured, such a small matter like traveling was nothing to him. From the place where he talked to the old devil to Peng Lai, it only took him a dozen breaths of time. From afar, he could see that there were already a few people standing outside the main hall of the main peak of Peng Lai. He counted and found that there were 4 of them. He took a deep breath and landed on the ground. The old devil didn't say a word and was pulled behind him. The 4 people outside the hall were Taoist Master Zai, Lu Gongzan, Bai Yunxin, and the 9th young master. He landed on the ground and pulled the chain in his hand to pull the 10,000-year-old ancestor to his side. He said in a deep voice, "I've caught him." Lu Gongzan didn't go forward for a moment. He stared at him from left to right before saying, "Brother Xing, you." On the contrary, the 9th young master laughed and leaped over in a few steps. "I told you not to worry. He's very capable." He rushed to the front of Li Yunxin and didn't even look at the old devil. He pulled Li Yunxin's sleeve and said, "Where's my sister? Are you hurt?" "She." Li Yunxin sighed in a low voice. "I couldn't protect her. The ninth young master was stunned. He opened his mouth but couldn't say anything for a moment. Lu Gongzan took 2 steps forward and then stopped. He only stared at Li Yunxin. "Brother XN, did something happen to you?" When he said this, his eyes fell on the old devil. The old devil was extremely arrogant before he came to Peng Lai. But here, his performance was much better than what Li Yunxin had expected. He took the initiative to pretend to be dispirited and listless, as if he was on the verge of death. When Lu Gongzan's gaze fell on him, he glared back at him fiercely. "One day this old man will—" Li Yunxin pulled the iron chain and interrupted him. He didn't look at Lu Gongzan. He just said in a low voice, "Qing Shui, find a way to send him underground. I injured him but I can't kill him. He's a scourge if he stays here. We need to get rid of him as soon as possible." Daoist Qing Shui didn't show up. Daoist Zai said in a low voice, "Dragon King, how did you catch this old devil?" "People from Yunshan came." Li Yunxin sighed. "Xinyu and I fought with them first. Then we lured them to fight with the old devil. When they were both injured we took action. But the old devil's cultivation was too high. We couldn't escape unscathed. Qing Shui, even if you have other ideas, you should help me get rid of this old devil first. Otherwise, once he escapes, do you still expect Yunshan to send more people to be my knives?" The old devil laughed strangely. "Get rid of me? Do you know that I have an immortal body now? I'm afraid you—" Lu Gongzan interrupted him. "Brother XN, do you remember when we first met? You taught me a formation. What formation is that?" Li Yunxin was surprised at first. Then he shook his head with a smile and sighed. "Old Lu, you don't believe that I can catch this old devil? When we first met I was robbed. I was driven to the woods and almost died. I taught you a painting called Walking in the Night, painted with my feet. When we were in Wei City you brought me food one night. It was Munanju's stir-fried meat with hibiscus and soy sauce beef. You loved Munanchan the most. Old Lu, I am me, not someone pretending to be me." Lu Gongzan finally heaved a sigh of relief. The vigilance on his face disappeared. He said, Good. Brother XN, it's really you." Lu Gongzan, who knew him the best, also recognized his identity. Qing Shui Daoist finally showed up. A green light flashed in the field. The current master of Dragon Island appeared next to Zai Daoist. But she still looked at Li Yunxin carefully, then at the 10,000-year-old ancestor and said, "Can't be killed, what do you mean? You can check its breath yourself." Li Yunxin stepped aside, thought for a moment, then sneered, "Old Lu, come and watch with her. She's worried that I'll play some tricks. For example, if she comes over, the old devil will suddenly kill her." Lu Gongzan walked forward without hesitation. After a while, he slowly raised his hand and put it on the old devil's shoulder. The old devil shouted, "You dare?" But Lu Gongzan was also in the mysterious realm. The old devil deliberately restrained his breath. He didn't even frown and closed his eyes. After 3 breaths of time, he opened his eyes and said, "It's indeed weakened. But—" He paused and glanced at Li Yunxin. "But the vitality in his body is endless. It seems to be condensed by the art of painting. With my cultivation, if I can't find the place where his body formed the formation, I can't kill him." Chapter 793. Li Yunxin's face was expressionless, but his heart was beating fast. Whether it was him, or the old monster, they both knew very well that the 10,000-year ancestor was not a person who was created by painting Dao. Lu Gongzan said these words but didn't leave. Instead, he stood quietly beside the old monster and said to Daoist Qing Shui, "You can check it yourself." Daoist Qing Shui frowned. "Painting Dao?" She was interested in this word, so she slowly walked over and raised her hand. At this time, the 9th young master could finally speak. He didn't care about the 10,000-year ancestor or the painting Dao. He just stared at Li Yunxin. "You can't save her? Can't you save her?" Daoist Qing Shui's fingertips touched the body of the 10,000-year ancestor. At this moment, Li Yunxin suddenly pulled back the iron chain in his hand. Around the old monster, his power skyrocketed and black fog appeared. 3 tentacles stretched out from his back and tied Daoist Qing Shui up. They were now outside the hall. The sun was blazing like fire. But once the old monster got free, the world suddenly darkened. The chilly wind roared and the ghostly atmosphere returned to the situation last night. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. When the Purple Knight Daoist realized the situation had changed and was about to react, Li Yunxin, who had been waiting for him, suddenly attacked him and exploded his head with one palm. Until his death, the mysterious realm Daoist was still thinking, was this a trap set by Li Yunxin? Or did the old monster really get out of the trap himself? Daoist Qingshui's eyes widened and he knew he was doomed. He could only shout, Li Yunxin. You're crazy. You don't want your life, do you want the lives of the people around you? The ninth young master was still in a daze while Bai Yunxin was about to leave. But the old monster laughed strangely, Ha! Don't even think about leaving. Then, the giant tree-like body appeared and stretched out countless tentacles, tightly encircling the surroundings, weaving an inescapable net. Only Lu Gongzan was the calmest. It was as if he had already expected that Li Yunxin would come up with some strange plan. He glanced at Taoist Master Purple Knight's remains, then at the remnant soul that had hurriedly fled far away before the old devil could use his divine ability. He said in a deep voice, Brother X and did you two discuss something? The old monster laughed again. What did you discuss? Ha 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 ha, of course it was because they had successfully negotiated something. I want to kill you to prove my loyalty. Now that the old devil was proud of himself, he became more talkative. He then looked at Li Yunxin, who had a gloomy expression on his face. This Lu Gongzan seems to understand your intentions. You actually know how to make up a lie to trick Qingshui. You can see that she really trusts you. Haha, Li Yunxin, if you beg me properly, this old man will really spare his life. Lu Gongzan was stunned and frowned. Prove my loyalty? The ninth young master finally reacted. What do you mean? Li Yunxin was silent for a while and looked up at him. Prove my loyalty is, if I kill you, the old ancestor will let me go. He raised his hand and patted the ninth young master's shoulder. Little Joer, goodbye. What? Before the ninth young master could say another word, his body exploded into a cloud of blood mist. Suddenly there was silence. Other than the roaring waves on the surface of the ocean, Taoist Qingshui, Lu Gongzan, and Bai Yunxin were all quiet after witnessing this scene. Even the old monster exclaimed after a breath of time, Wonderful! You're really ruthless. Lu Gongzan was dumbfounded. His eyelids trembled slightly and his voice was hoarse as if he had swallowed charcoal. Brother Xe, you? Li Yunxin waved his hand. Some blood splashed on his white robe. This time is different, old Lu. He sighed and walked slowly towards the white clouds. We have never seen the real Grand Elder on land. But this time I saw him. In the past, the strong enemies we met were stubborn rocks, but we can be steel nails. If we find the right angle and gap, maybe we can pry it open. But this old ancestor is a piece of fine iron. In front of him, we are just grass and trees. There is no hope. He stood 3 steps away from Bai Yunxin. There is no hope. I can't afford to sacrifice myself. If I can use your lives to exchange for a chance to turn things around, I think you will be happy for me. He raised his hand towards Bai Yunxin. Don't hide. Your adoptive father has a chance here. But the difference between you and me is like the clouds and mud. Don't do useless things. Bai Yunxin gritted her teeth. Did you kill Li Xinyu as well? Li Yunxin smiled. She's luckier. She didn't need to see all this. My adoptive father is coming. The female monster said with a trembling voice. Even if he can't do anything to the old devil, he can kill you. Think carefully. Your adoptive father is too slow. In other words, he should have come, but he wanted to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Li Yunxin shook his head. I guess he didn't expect that his daughter would be killed. Are you really so heartless? Li Yunxin tilted his head. I have feelings for myself. After saying this, he thought for a while. But your adoptive father may not have any feelings for you. You said he would arrive a day ago. He hasn't arrived a day later. How can a Grand Elder be so slow? The old devil listened to their conversation. At first he seemed to be interested. But when the two of them talked about love, he became impatient. He yelled, Hey, you're dawdling. Are you soft-hearted now? Li Yunxin immediately sneered and turned to look at him. Soft-hearted? Ancestor, is this what you call soft-hearted? A mass of incomparably violent netherworld chi suddenly gushed out from his palm. However, it wasn't aimed at Bai Yunxin but at Lu Gongzan. Lu Gongzan was a dragon son's demon body, so he was already strong. He was also in the mysterious realm, so his cultivation was even more profound. If he could protect himself with luck, he wouldn't die in one blow like the Purple Knight Taoist. But he didn't move and only looked at Li Yunxin. He was hit by this blow. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere and he died. It was at this moment that a terrible aura suddenly came from high up in the sky. It was as if a god had opened his eyes in the sky. Some kind of extremely terrible pressure even penetrated the inescapable net woven by the 10,000-year ancestors' tentacles and descended on everyone. Then a thunderous voice exploded. Li Yunxin. If you dare to hurt her, you will be doomed eternally. This was the aura of a true Grand Elder. It wasn't even inferior to the current 10,000-year ancestor. When the old devil revealed his true form, the sea and sky were originally filled with angry wind and black fog. But now, countless dazzling lights shot down from the sky, dispersing most of the black fog. It was as if the sky was heaven, and the sea was the netherworld. Then in the sky, white clouds suddenly rolled and multicolored light shone down. On top of the clouds, there were countless demon soldiers and generals in bright armor, holding halberds and sabers, standing with angry eyes. In the middle there was a god. Golden light shone around him and his face couldn't be seen clearly. However, the terrifying pressure between the sea and the sky came from his body. Chapter 794. Feeling the pressure, the old monster looked up at the god and laughed furiously. How dare a Grand Elder of the continent come to my sea to behave atrociously? Although his tone was arrogant and fearless, it was impossible for him to ignore the terrifying pressure. There were only two true Grand Elders left in this world. One was him, and the other was the Golden Rock King who had been sealed on the continent for 2,000 years. Just like in a battle between experts, one had to concentrate and not miss a single move. Now that the old monster was using all his strength to resist the pressure from the top of the sky and had seen Li Yunxin kill Lu Gongzan without hesitation, he finally stopped prying into his thoughts like before. Thus, he didn't notice that after Lu Gongzan died, Li Yunxin seemed to be frozen in place. He stood there as if he had lost his mind. But this state only lasted for a moment. The next moment he suddenly opened his eyes and the wolf-spine raging lion spear appeared in his hand. Without the slightest hesitation, the spear pierced straight into the heart of the 10,000-year-old ancestor. He used all his strength. This spear pierced through the old monster's body, only the tip of the spear sticking out in front of him. But the old monster reacted very quickly. Before Li Yunxin had time to pull out the spear and stab a second time, he turned his mind back to the old monster's mind. Then he found something that puzzled him but had no time to think about. In his mind, the cold and resolute idea of killing everyone in the world just for his own pleasure disappeared. What followed was a turbulent wave of consciousness. Countless scenes of the past, the time he spent with Lu Gongzan, the time he spent with Ninth Young Master, the time he spent with Red Lady Bai Yunxin, echoed in his consciousness. What was even more turbulent was endless hatred, killing intent, and a strong will that would never yield or compromise. The old monster was shocked and angry. He roared, "You sure pretend. Die." With a thought, the restriction that had been placed in Li Yunxin's mind immediately activated. Then he turned around abruptly, and the countless tentacles on his back pounced at his chest, wanting to grind his body into pieces. However, Li Yunxin, who should have lost his mind and stood there in a daze, was not affected at all. Just as the tentacles were about to reach him, a golden light shot out from his ear. Although the Monkey King's armor was tattered and his appearance was in a sorry state, his imposing manner was like a rainbow. He waved his golden cudgel and welcomed the old monster's attack. However, the monkey demon had already been severely injured. At this moment, rather than saying it was a single strike, it would be more accurate to say that he was only trying to block this killer move for Li Yunxin. His golden rod struck the old devil's head, but his body was also smashed by the old devil's tentacles. With a muffled groan, he turned into a golden light and returned to Li Yunxin's ear. However, this attack was successful. The old monster's body froze for a moment. Li Yunxin, who was covered in bloody wounds from the fierce wind and upstanding qi, burst forth with all his strength again. The spear nailed the devil head to the wall of Penglai's main hall. After this attack, he had no strength to get up and slumped to the ground. The old monster was furious and wanted to escape before killing him. However, the wolf's back and lion's spear was the bane of the netherworld. Even the Black King of Hell had died to this spear. Once it entered his body, it actually restricted the netherworld's energy, so the old monster couldn't break free for a while. Moreover, he found that the spear was absorbing the netherworld energy that he had painstakingly refined at a terrifying speed. He was shocked and angry. He roared and struggled with all his might. However, the spear was like a dead object. Li Yunxin was already an arrow at the end of its flight and couldn't control it anymore. He saw that the old monster was about to break free. He looked up at the sky. Above the clouds, the golden deity and the divine generals didn't move at all and only looked down coldly. At this time, Bai Yunxin came back to his senses and shouted, "That was an illusion. When I came here, foster father gave me a talisman." Li Yunxin could only look to the side. Daoist Qingshui had been restrained by the old monster before. However, when she took Li Yunxin's first attack, she was shocked and angry and threw her off. She wasn't as close as Li Yunxin and wasn't as heavily injured as Li Yunxin, so she wasn't affected by the fight between the old monster and the great sage. Now she stood far away and looked coldly at Li Yunxin. Seeing his gaze, she said, "What are you acting now?" Li Yunxin spat out a mouthful of golden blood. "Acting your ass. Quickly use Dragon Island to kill him. We can't trap him for long." The spear was already loosening. Half of the old monster's body was about to break free. He let out an earth-shattering roar. "Li Yunxin, I want you to taste all the pain in this world. I want." However, Daoist Qingshui's voice was still cold. "I said that Dragon Island doesn't have much energy. If we use it to kill him, the restriction will be opened." At that time, the aura of the netherworld, "I've already asked Yunshan to set up a restriction outside." Li Yunxin shouted, "Do you want to die together? Don't you want to see Qin Zhao?" It was unknown which sentence triggered the knot in Daoist Qingshui's heart. She was silent for a breath's time. Finally, she raised her hand and pointed a few times in the air. In the sky, the illusion and powerful aura summoned by Bai Yunxin's talisman suddenly disappeared. What replaced it was lightning that suddenly appeared and weaved into a net of light. Suddenly there were tiny electric snakes swimming in the air. Everything between the sea and the sky started to light up. A huge amount of ocean water was evaporated by an invisible force and rushed up to the sky. Then a bright line flashed in the air. Flashed again. 2 consecutive attacks landed on the old monster who was about to break free. After the first attack, the black fog around him suddenly disappeared and the light in his body became dim. After the second attack, his huge body was almost broken into pieces and turned into rotten wood. Daoist Qingshui took a deep breath and made the third attack. This insufferably arrogant old devil let out one last wild roar, and turned to ashes. Then an even more terrifying sound came. The murky seawater that was surging around Penglai Island suddenly roared and rushed to the far distance. A huge whirlpool that was hundreds of miles away from Penglai Island but could still be seen with the naked eye appeared. The whole island began to be shaken by the raging waves and moved toward the horrifying whirlpool that was big enough to contain the whole East Sea nation. But the next moment, a black pillar rushed out of the whirlpool and shot thousands of meters high. Then, as if it hit an invisible barrier, it scattered in all directions. That was the horrifying power that gushed out from the netherworld. It was much richer and purer than any netherworld chi that they had felt before. Even the ocean water that was rushing toward the whirlpool was rolled back. Around the black pillar made of the netherworld chi, a water mountain, that was taller than any mountain on land was formed. The netherworld cave opened. Li Yunxin, Bai Yunxin, and Daoist Qingshui were speechless when they saw this scene. After a dozen breaths, Daoist Qingshui let out a long breath and looked at Li Yunxin. "I don't know if it's worth it." Her voice trembled slightly. It was unknown if she was shocked by the destruction of Dragon Island and the opening of the netherworld cave, or by what Li Yunxin did just now. Or maybe it was a combination of both. Li Yunxin tried to get up. But he only lifted one leg and slipped again. Bai Yunxin slowly came over and helped him up. He held the hand of the female demon and walked 4 to 5 steps forward. Then he let go and sat down. Beside him there should have been blood. On his left it should be Lu Gongzhan's. On his right it should be the 9th young masters. But the blood and remains were gone. The clash between the 2 Taishang experts even scraped off a layer of the ground. It was impossible for anything to be left. He silently reached out and rubbed the ground for a while before saying, "What's worth it or not?" Daoist Qingshui looked at him from afar, sacrificing them in exchange for a moment of relaxation from the 10,000-year-old ancestor. "Although I don't know much about this plan of yours, I know that there are many variables. Even if it succeeds now, is it worth it? They are all dead." Li Yunxin turned to look at him. "They and I. None of us would want to struggle at death's door. They and I would rather die than become this old thing's lackey. I know this better than you." He paused and said, "Old Lu understands me. He trusts me." At this moment heavy rain fell. The water vapor that was rising to the sky met the aura of the netherworld and condensed into black raindrops. Li Yunxin turned his head and wiped the water off his face. Then he patted the cold ground. "And you know, I have a way to save them." He said in a low voice, "It's not a difficult thing for me. It's not difficult at all. It's very simple." Bai Yunxin sighed and helped to disperse the heavy rain on his head. Daoist Qingshui smiled, "I hope so. But it's your mother's wish," Li Yunxin said. Daoist Qingshui did not get angry. She thought for a while and her eyes turned cold. "The female monster beside you is no match for me. You are seriously injured. Give me a reason not to kill you. I still have people to save. Does that count?" The female Taoist Qingshui smiled, "It's not someone I care about." Li Yunxin raised his hand and patted Bai Yunxin's hand. "You should leave now." The female monster was stunned. "What? This place will soon become the netherworld." Li Yunxin sighed, "That woman and I have cultivated the netherworld body, but you don't. If you don't leave now, it will be too late." Daoist Qingshui frowned. I'm not an idiot," Li Yunxin said. "You did so many things and came here, abandoning everything on land. Is it just to declare your territory?" He raised his hand weakly and pointed at the sea. "There's a spare body for you underwater. You also want to go to the netherworld to see Qinzhao. I'm the one they want. You killed me, so Qinzhao will hate you. Does that count as a reason?" He looked at Bai Yunxin again. "Let's go." The female monster did not move. "I'll protect you here." Li Yunxin laughed. "Protect me? I killed all the way from the emptiness realm to the Grand Supreme. That old thing still died in my hands. Who in the world has killed a real Grand Supreme?" The netherworld power in the black rain helped him recover some strength. Li Yunxin stood up slowly. "It's not like we're separated by life and death. We'll meet again in the future. Go back and tell your adoptive father. Tell him to watch Cloud Mountain. You've always been very rational. Don't ask me to say more. I'm very tired." The female monster was silent for a while. Suddenly, she removed the restriction that had dispelled the heavy rain from her body. Her clothes, hair, and face were quickly drenched. She looked deeply at Li Yunxin and said, "Okay." Then she turned into a beam of white light and disappeared into the rain. Daoist Qingshui did not stop her. Chapter 795. Only the two of them faced each other in the rain. The black rain that blotted out the sky and covered the earth became heavier and heavier, gradually forming a curtain. After 3 breaths, the coldness on Daoist Qingshui's face disappeared. She turned around and walked towards the main hall of Penglai Island. "The crane monster doesn't love you as much as the fish monster." Li Yunxin sighed and slowly followed behind her. Idle Fish is a ghost cultivator. She has her own obsession. She is a monster cultivator, so she is more rational. The Taoist stopped under the eaves of the hall and turned around. "Which one do you love?" Li Yunxin thought for a while. "I don't even know if it is love." But Daoist Qingshui seemed not to hear him. "If you love the fish monster, why did you let her go through so much suffering? If you love the crane monster, why did you chase her away? You can ask her to refine the netherworld too." Li Yunxin also walked up the stairs and stood beside her under the eaves of the hall. The curtain of rain covered the pillar of qi that shot up to the sky. But the slight trembling of Penglai Island meant that the qi of the netherworld was still spewing out. The black fog in the air became thicker. Only those who had refined the netherworld could see through the black fog and see the scene in the distance. He sighed. "Did you go to the netherworld just to ask Qinzhao about this?" Daoist Qingshui was silent for a while. "I didn't do what she asked me to do. I also destroyed the Dragon Island. I don't know if she will blame me." Neither of them spoke and remained silent for a while. The atmosphere under the eaves gradually calmed down. The killing intent, viciousness, and sorrow that he felt not long ago slowly faded away. After a while, Li Yunxin raised his hand and patted her shoulder, as if he was comforting her. This action made Daoist Qingshui's eyes slightly widen. She took a step away and looked at Li Yunxin. "What are you doing?" Li Yunxin smiled. "Let me tell you something. Even if 2 masters were to interact, they should have the bearing of a master and not be as petty as a villager." Li Yunxin's action seemed too intimate. From Clearwater's point of view, the two of them had only reached a temporary agreement, and their relationship was far from good enough for them to do what they did just now. But looking at the current Li Yunxin, only then did she realize that his entire appearance seemed to have changed. The bloodstains on his face had all disappeared. It was a very common thing for divine arts practitioners to heal themselves with some spirit qi, but the demonic energy in Li Yunxin's body seemed to have become more abundant. It had happened unknowingly in less than a quarter of an hour. How could it be so fast? Then, he realized that at such a close distance after he was heavily injured, he had raised his hand to pat his shoulder, and he hadn't even noticed it. She was shocked and took 2 steps back. What is it? I think I'm Grand Supreme. Li Yunxin looked at her seriously, his eyes calm and clear. Just now. Daoist Qingshui was stunned. Only then did he realize that after killing the 10,000-year ancestor, Li Yunxin's body no longer had any power. People with extremely high cultivation bases would often be able to sense a faintly discernible power. In the past he also liked to talk with a smile. But in that smile there was viciousness, murderous intent, and it was sharp. But now she couldn't sense any trace of viciousness, and even, she felt that she wasn't looking at a person. Instead, she was looking at the scenery between heaven and earth or anything else. For example, the bright moon rising in the west and setting in the east, or the tired birds returning to the forest at dusk, or the purple air coming slowly in the morning, or the clouds on the peak of the mountain. For example, a pool of water, a fish, a cup of tea. But these images had no connection with each other, and shouldn't be used to describe one's feeling towards a person. However, in her consciousness, there were countless of such images appearing and disappearing. After a while, she realized that it was because of Li Yunxin's aura that she couldn't sense anymore. Once she had such a thought, it would quickly slide thousands of miles away, and no one knew where it was projected. She was so shocked that she couldn't say a word and took 2 steps back. Then she heard Li Yunxin say in a low voice, "It was because the 10,000-year ancestor could peek into my thoughts. So I became cold-blooded. Those emotions that called me cold-blooded formed another me. That I lured him here, killed both of them, and gained his trust. But when I created another me, I also added a awakening mechanism for myself. That is to kill Lu Gongzan. It's too dangerous to reconstruct consciousness. I wasn't sure if I could wake up. At present, the strongest thing that touched me in this world was his death in my hands. I knew that after his death, the 10,000-year ancestor's vigilance towards me would be at its lowest. At that time, I had a chance to do something. He had planted a seal in my consciousness. When he found out that he had fallen into the trap, he activated the restriction and destroyed the cold-blooded me, the darkest, most violent, and most terrible part of my heart. But it seems that it was because of this that I was promoted to Grand Supreme. Li Yunxin looked at Taoist Qingshui, but I still don't know. To become Grand Supreme, what do I need? Is it unconditional love or the heart of equality for all? I don't think I have either now. But I can feel that I'm different. I also feel that I can understand some other things. He looked at Taoist Qingshui gently. So now I really want to know, what do you think Li Chunfeng wants me to do? Taoist Qingshui felt a little cold because of Li Yunxin's current attitude. Because his attitude was too gentle at the moment. In fact, she was used to speaking in such a tone. When anger was not released, she would suppress it. But others should be able to see it. Therefore she would feel an inexplicable pressure and be more careful. But now she couldn't tell whether Li Yunxin's gentleness was real or fake. She also didn't know if Li Yunxin was suppressing his anger or if he really didn't have any grudges in his heart. The previous peaceful atmosphere, at least for her, was gone. The female Taoist who was born from heaven and earth took a deep breath. What do you want to say by asking him at this time? Li Yunxin looked at her calmly. This is related to how I saved them. You, Qin Zhao, and the elders above Cloud Mountain all know that this world is in danger. Therefore the elders of Cloud Mountain want to leave. This is a choice. Qin Zhao and the others underground want everyone to live and fight against the mother of the netherworld. This is another choice. But there seems to be a third choice. This is what Li Chunfeng wants me to do. He frowned slightly. How much does Li Chunfeng know about this world and the so-called catastrophe? Taoist Qingshui carefully observed his expression and sensed his aura, but she couldn't see anything. After thinking for 2 breaths, she said, "The catastrophe doesn't refer to the mother of the netherworld. Qin Zhao is hiding something and doesn't want to say it. What I know, Li Chunfeng also knows." Li Yunxin nodded. "I know too. What else?" Taoist Qingshui let out another breath. "If you want," Li Yunxin seemed to know what she was thinking just by looking at her. He interrupted her and gently raised his left hand to the sky. "I swear on my Taoist heart, fate, or something else. On the ground I won't kill you. I've killed enough. I'm tired now. Don't worry, just say it." Taoist Qingshui wasn't sure if the so-called heart knot and catastrophe were still effective when one reached Li Yunxin's realm. But she still heaved a sigh of relief. Then she realized that she was very unusual now. But this wasn't a good thing. She was born from heaven and earth and had a high status in the past 1,000 years. She had long developed a personality that didn't show her emotions and wasn't afraid in the face of danger. But just now she seemed to have become an ordinary person. She would be afraid, worried, and fearful. She would unconsciously lower her status in front of the strong. Once she thought of this, she felt like a person suddenly floating up from the water. She immediately felt the flow of qi in her body become much smoother. Thus, she took 4 or 5 steps back and said, "This is also because of your Grand Supreme Realm?" Li Yunxin seemed to know what she was referring to. He shook his head. "I don't know." Taoist Qing Shui stared at him for a while and said hesitantly, "Those things? I can tell you. It's just that I can't guess Li Chuanfeng's thoughts. I thought he was loyal to me and was working hard for what I wanted to do. But I didn't expect him to have other plans. So, you two are really similar." At this point she realized she made a slip of the tongue. She immediately looked at Li Yunxin's expression. But this demon who claimed to be Grand Supreme didn't show any displeasure. Instead he was listening carefully. It was as if the Li Chunfeng she was talking about was just an ordinary person in the world. Taoist Qing Shui let out a sigh of relief. Then she realized she was in that kind of uneasy mood again. Damn it. Although the Grand Elder didn't have any intimidating aura, his undetectable ability, which could make one's mind and emotions go according to his will, was much more dreadful than the naked aura of a mystery state demon beast. If she took another step back, she would be pushed to the wall. She could only use the spiritual power in her body to keep herself alert. Then she continued, "He indeed has his own ideas on how to deal with the catastrophe. Based on my speculation, his ideas might be reflected in the art of painting. When he was with me, he was especially interested in the art of painting. It's normal for cultivators to practice diligently, but he was more inclined to the art of painting, not how to improve his realm and strength. Otherwise, with his intelligence, he wouldn't be in the profound realm today. Later, I knew he gave you the 9 C's painting." Taoist Qing Shui looked at Li Yunxin. "It seemed that he intended to help you deal with the Dragon King and the Unicorn. But just for this he had many other ways, so he didn't need to use this method. So, it confirmed my speculation. Do you know where he went after he left the East Sea?" Li Yunxin said calmly, "He said he went to live in seclusion with Shangguanyu." Taoist Qing Shui shook her head slightly, "But what I know is that the two of them are traveling the world hand in hand, at this time traveling the world hand in hand. He's definitely not going to live in seclusion. He should be doing something else. The art of painting." Li Yunxin said these 2 words, "He's still painting with the world. And I guess he's doing this for you." Taoist Qing Shui said, "You have too many responsibilities. He wants to put the whole world into the painting and send it to you. But I don't know what's the point of doing this." Li Yunxin thought for a moment and said softly, "It's a little useful. I have a 9 C's painting in my hand. In this painting it's almost a small world. But this kind of thing, what's the use? If this world is destroyed, I'll be destroyed and the painting will be destroyed. Even if the painting is not destroyed, there's no one in it. It's just a scene." Taoist Qing Shui hesitated for a moment. "You are now the Grand Elder. How far can the Grand Elder of painting reach?" Li Yunxin answered her directly, "It's easy to take things, but it's hard to take people. The qi in the human body is far more complicated than the qi in the world, and everyone is different. If I have a year, I can paint a living person into the painting. That's him. But there are so many people and living things in this world, and the qi of cultivators is thousands of times more complicated. I can't put everyone in this world into the painting. Just like how an ant could move gravel, in theory it could also slowly move a mountain. But that's just a theory, it's impossible." "Maybe, he really only wanted to bring a few people," Taoist Qing Shui said. Li Yunxin laughed. "And then where? Throw it into outer space? Even if it can be preserved, it'll be destroyed slowly. The reason why the world in my 9C scroll is so lively is because of my demonic power. If it leaves me, it'll go dormant, and then it'll be transferred to the hands of the next owner. He still has to cultivate the art of painting, and his cultivation must be high enough to open it. But he can't control and rewrite it like I can. If no one cares about it and there's no demon power, Reiki, and the netherworld aura, it'll quickly exhaust its own Reiki and become a dead thing. This process won't take more than 100,000 years. And the more people in the painting, the faster the Reiki will be consumed. It might not even last a few thousand years. This method isn't the third one. Li Chunfeng isn't that stupid. It's just that we can't predict what he's thinking about." He thought for a while. "Looks like I should ask him in person." Taoist Qing Shui was shocked. "Now, yes, before I go to the netherworld." Li Yunxin was silent for a while. "I don't know what's in there. I don't know if it'll be of any use if I go there. So before that, I have to deal with everything. But the netherworld is already open," Taoish Qingshui said. Said the Clearwater man, at any moment, perhaps in a quarter of an hour, something will come out of it. Maybe Qin Zhao will come to pick you up. How long do you want them to wait? Li Yunxin stretched and said in a low voice, the rain is annoying. Let's stop. So, the clouds stopped and the rain stopped. The heavy rain that had been pouring down suddenly disappeared. There wasn't even a process of it becoming sparse. It was as if someone had wiped it away. Therefore they could clearly see that the terrifying netherworld pillar was still erupting in the distance. Black clouds were rolling in the sky. The sun became a small spot of light, like a 15-watt lamp that shone brightly. It won't be long, he said. They can leave me hanging and I can leave them hanging for a while. But you should wait here. Beware of those people on Cloud Mountain. Chapter 796. Daoish Qingshui saw what Li Yunxin did just now. She suddenly had an idea. This idea lingered in her mind for a while. After thinking about it for a while, she finally said, I'm afraid the people on Mount Yunshan won't let this go. She was about to say a few more words when Li Yunxin nodded, yes. Grandmaster D originally wanted the Dragon Island. He wanted to use the Dragon Island to provide him with energy to leave this place. Now that the Dragon Island is destroyed, there's only this prohibition left. They aren't sure if they can leave, so they won't let the netherworld aura spread to the whole world. They also know that if that happens, the people underground will come out and their plan will fail. But they will definitely try to extract the netherworld aura from this prohibition. Li Yunxin sighed. To me, this is like a car running out of oil and running to the oil field to find oil. Crude oil can't be used and they have to go through a complicated refining process. But it's hard to say if they can complete this process. He looked at Daoish Qingshui, so you want me to help you increase your cultivation. Only then can you preside over the netherworld on the surface without the Dragon Island. Daoish Qingshui took a deep breath. Yes. My body is condensed by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It's very risky to go to the netherworld. I wanted to refine it myself, but it's not foolproof. Your realm and cultivation now. Okay. Li Yunxin interrupted her. Let's start now. Daoish Qingshui was slightly stunned because his attitude was too decisive and easy. After waiting for 2 breaths, Li Yunxin still didn't say anything. She frowned. You don't have anything else to say? Li Yunxin smiled faintly. What else? Conditions? Or do I need to plant a prohibition on you? There's no need. He looked at Daoish Qingshui seriously. You don't know how strong I am now. The female Daoist was speechless. This was indeed Li Yunxin's style. But now that he said it, it was different. Now he did seem to be stating a fact and in a somewhat conservative tone. She heard him say, I originally planned to use that body of yours at the bottom of the sea. Use it to reconstruct a netherworld body for Li Xinyu. But for now I want to try a better option. But, you can try it at present. Oh, don't worry about that. Nothing will happen. At most, it will just happen again. As Li Yunxin said this, he raised his hand and pointed at the ocean in the distance. You are born from the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. In theory, drawing your soul shouldn't be a difficult task. An ordinary person's soul can be seen as 3-dimensional, but yours is 2-dimensional. Just imprint your divine soul on it. I couldn't do it before, but now I can try. You injected a portion of your spirit chi into the monster's body, so I only need to replenish the remaining half. But it will take some effort. His tone was calm, but it had an irresistible force. The Taoist of Clearwater was stunned. Try. Use me to test it? This matter, it's best to think about it at length. Li Yunxin smiled. I told you it's just a little difficult. But she frowned. It's a little difficult for you now? How long do you want to try? A long time. From the moment I patted your shoulder. Li Yunxin suddenly raised his hand, and a huge body suddenly rose from the ocean in the distance. It was split in half like a huge piece of human skin. It seems to be successful now. The Taoist of Clearwater didn't understand what he meant. But she suddenly felt her body stiffen, and the qi in her body couldn't circulate anymore. She was shocked and found that her vision suddenly turned dark. Even her spirit sense couldn't penetrate this kind of darkness, and all information was confined to her body. But this state only lasted for a very short moment. Even before the shock in her mind had dissipated, everything returned to normal. She was shocked. What did you do? Only after asking this question did he realize that something within his body had changed. There was no spiritual energy. It was replaced by the pure netherworld qi. Her connection with the sea and sky was also cut off, and she became an independent individual. This feeling was difficult for ordinary people to understand. Humans were relatively independent. But for the Taoist of Clearwater who was condensed by spiritual energy, this kind of independence soon brought a strong sense of loneliness and loss. She panicked and repeated what she said just now. "What did you do?" Li Yunxin looked at her calmly. "I helped you to cultivate the netherworld body. Isn't this what you want?" The Taoist widened her eyes. "You succeeded? Now." She looked at herself subconsciously. Her appearance didn't change, but her body was indeed different. She raised her head and said with difficulty, "Didn't you say, it'll take a little bit of effort?" Li Yunxin suddenly laughed. He flew up to the sky and went straight to the sky. "It took me a full quarter of an hour to do this. Isn't that a little exhausting? You just stay here and wait for me to come back." His voice was still there, but he was already gone. The Taoist of Clearwater stood still with mixed feelings in her heart. Wave after wave of complex emotions hit her consciousness, making her almost unable to think for more than 10 breaths. She could only go with the flow of those waves of consciousness. When the flow in her mind finally calmed down a little and she could think, she realized one thing: she was trapped here by Li Yunxin. In a way that she asked for benevolence and got benevolence. Originally, she asked Li Yunxin to help her cultivate the netherworld body with the intention of coercion. He wanted to go to the land to do something, but here he was facing the threat of Yunshan. Therefore, someone had to take care of this place so that it wouldn't be in trouble again. Li Yunxin would help her, and he would put his heart into it. At least, she could deal with the previous ancestor of 10,000 years. But she didn't expect that what she asked for was so simple in the eyes of Li Yunxin. So simple that he didn't need to consider any other factors. The true Grand Supreme Realm was powerful to such an extent? Qin Zhao was also in the Grand Supreme Realm in the past, but he didn't like to show off like Li Yunxin, and he rarely showed his supernatural power in front of her. Now that the Grand Supreme's power was used on her, she realized the true horror of this realm. She lost the spiritual power between the sea and the sky, although she wanted to do so, but once it came true, she was like a child who had just left her mother's body and she didn't know what to do. Even though she could feel the powerful netherworld aura in her body now, she still felt uneasy. There was a voice in her mind, telling her not to leave this place. Don't leave this space that would soon be filled with the netherworld. Because here at least there was a familiar aura that made her feel slightly at ease. The Taoist of Clearwater took a deep breath. She knew that Li Yunxin was still the same Li Yunxin. The peaceful appearance she had seen before was just a facade. He must have planted some kind of restriction or buried some kind of heart devil in his body. Chapter 797. When Li Yunxin was still here, Taoist Qing Shui could always feel the terrifying aura around him. For example, when a person was immersed in the air, no matter how hard he tried, it would be hard to get rid of the influence that would break down the guard in his heart. But now that he was gone, she was like a drowning person coming out of dehydration. After a short period of confusion, she finally regained her senses and emotions. What came next was a strong sense of shame. She actually asked him for help. She didn't use any coercion or force. She didn't even stand on equal footing with him, but asked for his help. This was definitely not her style, nor was it her character. However, Li Yunxin's aura affected her. Although it did not make her feel a strong and clear sense of fear, it made her mind unconsciously waver. It was like a commoner meeting the son of heaven in a brilliant golden palace. Even if his face was taut and his back was straight, the sense of reverence in his heart was unable to be erased, and he naturally couldn't help but lower his position. And that was why she asked him for help. Now that she was herself again, she finally realized this. At the same time, she also realized that her fear of the outside world and the inexplicable feeling of wanting to stay here was also abnormal. Li Yunxin said that he wouldn't set any restriction on her, but he must have added something. But she couldn't do anything about it. This kind of thought was rational. The feeling of fear of the outside world was emotional. This emotion was so strong that she couldn't fight against it even if she clearly realized the truth. It was like a person who knew that it was safe to walk on a glass bridge, but she couldn't be completely free of fear. She could only sigh and think. Now that the Dragon Island was gone and she had cultivated the netherworld body, Li Yunxin was generous and cultivated her to the peak of the mystic realm. But she was still not Li Yunxin's opponent. But actually, she didn't want to compete with him anymore. She didn't want to kill him because of personal grudges. There was no selfless grudge, and there was no knot in her heart that couldn't be solved. On the contrary, she knew that Li Yunxin was looking for the third way that Li Chunfeng was thinking of. But she did not tell him. She was glad that the deception had succeeded. Because the third option depended on how much affection Li Yunxin had for the people in this world, and it depended on whether he was still human. When she watched Li Yunxin fight the demons alone with Li Chunfeng at the foot of Cloudy Mountain and realized that he was not the chosen one, she knew that the third option that Li Chunfeng designed might work. She had finally found a necessary condition. So at the time she said he might save the world. But after that, he gradually calmed down and realized that leaving all the decision-making power to him might be extremely dangerous. Because he was not a saint, a moral saint. But now, he had become the Grand Supreme Heart Devil. Was this the will of the heavens? Taoist Clearwater sighed again. She did not know what heaven's will was. When Li Yunxin escaped from the restriction, he felt a gust of wind obstructing him for a moment. Other than that, he didn't feel anything strange. At this time, the inside of the restriction was already dark and hazy. Wisps of thick netherworld aura drifted down from the top of the sky like many terrifying tentacles. The thick tentacles split into countless thin branches, as if there was a huge monster that wanted to swallow the sea and sky. But when he exited the restriction and looked back, he could only see the blue sea and sky. The restriction hid that part of the world. If a mortal went out to sea to such a distance, it would be extremely difficult for him to detect the existence of the netherworld on the ground. Even if he drove the ship straight there, he would quickly find himself in the fog. When he got out of the fog, he would probably find that the ship was dozens of nautical miles away from here. He only took a glance and continued to fly. The vast ocean water quickly receded below him, and he crossed thousands of nautical miles in an instant. But suddenly, he heard a voice in his consciousness. It sounded like he was in a speeding car and suddenly heard someone talking on the roadside. The voice quickly disappeared. But he stopped, looked down, and found that the person who spoke was on an isolated island far away. He stared at that person for a while, waved his sleeves and appeared on the island. "I heard that you were killed by the 10,000-year ancestor," Li Yunxin said. "Are you the only one alive now?" The person on the island was none other than Emperor Li. He was Emperor Li. This ghost emperor didn't look well. His figure was very faint like a shadow. Some parts of his body even became completely transparent, as if he was about to disappear from the world. Li Yunxin was far away and could only sense his aura. But now that he was close, he realized that there was another person under Emperor Li. It should be Emperor Ye's aura. Emperor Ye's figure was so faint that it was almost undetectable. In about an hour's time, it would completely disappear. But Emperor Li only said in a voice like a breeze, "Save me. Save me." The two ghost emperors hid under a huge rock on the island like shadows. They were hiding from the sunlight. But even ordinary ghosts didn't fear sunlight. The sun would only make them feel extremely uncomfortable. They didn't need to be like the two ghost emperors who feared sunlight like fire. This meant that they were really at the end of their road. They must have been badly hurt by the 10,000-year ancestor. Li Yunxin didn't save him as he wished. He stared at him for a while and said, "You are using it to prolong your life?" It was referring to Emperor Yi. While both were extremely weak, there was still a difference in strength. Emperor Li, who could barely speak, was above Emperor Ye's shadow. Li Yunxin could see that he was absorbing the power in Emperor Ye's body. Emperor Li rolled his eyes and stared at him. He said, "Save me? Save me?" He was a ghost cultivator. He was formed from obsession. When a person was at death's door, while his mind was confused and his body was weak, at least he was still confused. That meant there were many thoughts intertwining, but he couldn't think clearly and rationally. However, when this ghost cultivator that was formed from obsession was on the verge of death, the only desire to live in his heart would dominate his mind. Other than saving me, he didn't know anything else. Li Yunxin thought about this and sighed. He raised his hand and injected a trace of the power of the netherworld into Emperor Li's body. This power conflicted with the power in the ghost emperor's body, but it still helped him recover some energy. Emperor Li opened his eyes wide and could finally think, "Li Yunxin, save me. That old demon." Li Yunxin interrupted him, "I know. But I can't save you. There are two reasons. First, we are not tied together. We are using each other. And I don't like the way you do things. Second, Emperor Yi is tied to me. Now I see you are using his life to prolong your life. Now that I have explained these two things clearly, you can leave." Before Emperor Li could say another word, Yi Fuqian waved his sleeves and dispersed the ghost emperor. Then he raised his hand and drew a talisman in the air. Then he used his finger to pick up the ghost shadow of Emperor Yi, which was so faint that it was almost invisible, into the talisman. In an instant, Emperor Yi, full of the netherworld chi, appeared in front of him. It happened too fast. Emperor Yi, who had escaped from death, was still in a daze. His thoughts were still on the moment when he was defeated by the 10,000-year-old ancestor. He said subconsciously, Li Yun. However, he immediately sensed a powerful yet gentle power emanating from the other party's body. This power made him dumbfounded. His thoughts almost stopped. He heard Li Yunxin say, 3,000 li to the east, there is a land of the netherworld. Go there and wait for me. I'm leaving. As soon as he finished speaking, he really flew away. After a few breaths, he reappeared thousands of li away. He returned to the land this time to save Lu Gongzan and the 9th young master. He also wanted to settle some things. In the words of the cultivators in this world, it was the fruit of fate. When he first learned the Tao, he knew that there were celestials in the netherworld. He felt that the fruit of fate might be real. It was something that he couldn't explain clearly. It was something related to the next life and past life. It was very mysterious. But later on he slowly understood the secrets of the celestials in the netherworld. He felt that the fruit of fate might be used to deceive people. For example, when the audience watched a magic show, if they didn't know the inside story, they would have all sorts of mysterious associations. Some people would even think, maybe it wasn't just a magic show? But once they knew the inside story and the details of the mechanisms, the mystery would fade and their thoughts would return to reason. Before he became Grand Supreme, Li Yunxin belonged to this category. At that time, he knew that the celestials were just ghosts left behind by the previous civilization. Black Bai Yanjun of the netherworld was just a celestial who had infiltrated underground. They also had to do things according to the laws of this world. They weren't omnipotent gods who could create the world or even the laws. But now that he was in the Grand Supreme realm, he sensed something else. People below the true realm could only use laws. At the profound realm they could create laws. Now he knew that the so-called creation of the profound realm was just discovery. In his eyes, the laws of this world were very similar to the universe of consciousness in his mind. Countless laws could be abstracted into countless streams of laws. They traveled back and forth in this world and formed the foundation of this world. Just like how there were some streams of consciousness that played a major role in the human consciousness, some major laws were above all laws and maintained the basic appearance of this world. Most of them were hidden in various places and rarely came into use. But Li Yunxin felt that the reason these laws didn't work was because they lacked a certain condition. For example, according to Xie Sheng, many phenomena could only be observed under certain conditions. For example, in his own world, some physical phenomena could only be observed in extremely high-energy environments. In real life it was almost impossible to see. But this didn't mean they didn't exist. Those at the profound realm discovered them and used some kind of divine ability to create the conditions for them to appear. The cultivators below the Grand Supreme were all in this river of laws. They couldn't see the whole picture. And those who cultivated to the Grand Supreme could slightly raise their vision and see a part of this river. But it was only a part, and not the whole picture. Even so, Li Yunxin felt something else. For example, the fruit of fate. Or fate. This was something that was very difficult to describe with words. It was very much like a normal person's intuition. Li Yunxin knew that this so-called intuition actually came from observation of some details in life. It wasn't something profound. Intuition could be explained. But the fruit of fate, or fate, he felt was something completely different. If it was compared to a river, those who cultivated to the Grand Supreme realm would be able to see where the river was flowing to. Everything in the world was in this river. If they knew where it was going, they would know what might happen in the future. Maybe at some turn or turbulence, one thing or person would collide with another and produce a new result. This was the fruit of fate or fate. But this was just an example. What Li Yunxin saw was 1,000 times more complicated than this. There were too many factors that affected it, and the flow was not simply down or up. Its flow was random and chaotic at the level of time or space. He could see the present at most, but he was far from being able to predict the future. This made him realize that it was a wise choice to consciously cut off part of it when it was impossible to know whether the entanglement between two people would lead to good or bad results in the future. Perhaps it was because some of the strongest people in the world had peeped into this secret that the saying fruit of fate had been passed down. Because of this, all the cultivators in the world wanted to cut off something. He didn't pay much attention to this before, but now he realized its importance. This time he went to the land to cut off some fruit of fate and show off. There was an old saying, "Don't show off when you have a cat, just like walking in the night with clothes on." This was an irrefutable truth. He walked for another hour and finally approached the coast. A few months ago he went out to sea with Lu Baishui and the others. When he returned a few months later, he found that Whitewater Town had become a wasteland. This was to be expected. The tsunamis caused by the successive battles in the sea had destroyed many coastal towns. Because of its unique geographical location, the Whitewater Town had temporarily avoided the catastrophe. But then he fought with the monsters in the sea and the ancestor of the 10,000 years. The power generated by this fierce battle was not comparable to any tsunami. The hundreds of meters deep ocean water was completely dispersed several times, exposing the bottom of the sea. The disaster caused by this could not be resisted by the superior geographical location. When Li Yunxin arrived, there were still angry waves on the sea. In his eyes, the seaside had now advanced dozens of miles to the land. The former Whitewater Town should have been submerged under the water. He was stunned in the air for a while and then waved his sleeves. The endless water line that seemed to stretch to the horizon retreated in an instant. Chapter 798. He landed on the ground. There was originally some shallow water on the ground. The higher ground was also very muddy. But the moment his feet touched the ground, the land he touched immediately became dry. Soon, the remaining seawater on the ground as far as his eyes could see also receded. He exhaled lightly, drew something in the air casually and walked forward. Thus, the verdant grass and trees grew rapidly beside him as he walked, and spread into the distance. Li Yunxin mumbled, "That's amazing." He was not boasting about his methods, but the netherworld aura in his body. The netherworld aura did not look good. It looked like rolling black fog, overbearing and fierce. Anyone who came into contact with this thing for the first time would feel that it was a very strange thing. And the existence born from this aura, whether it was the 10,000-year-old ancestor or those skeletons, once it appeared, it meant destruction and chaos. But now that he had reached the advanced realm, he realized that in this aura, there was actually an endless vitality. This made him think of the 10,000-year-old ancestor's tree-shaped appearance, and the appearance of the three people under Gong Di when they finally merged. No matter when trees meant vitality. Was the final appearance of the two people also due to this vitality? Now that he had touched a little bit of this vitality, he casually displayed it. Unexpectedly, it was a situation of spring returning to the earth. It was really wonderful, very mystical. He was currently walking in the northwest direction, because the spirits of Lu Gongzan and the ninth young master should be there. Before they died, they were both Dragon Sun, and the dragon spirits were not destroyed. Once their physical bodies were destroyed, they would instantly escape far away and attach themselves to the body of the Dragon Sun who was closest to them. But now he was neither the dragon spirit nor the body of the Dragon Sun. His life was intertwined with that of the great sage, so he should belong to this world's unique species. Thus, the dragon spirit could not attach itself to his body. Before he sealed his consciousness, he did not think about these things in detail. He only vaguely felt that by doing this he would have a great chance of winning. It should be his subconscious or premonition at work. Now it seemed that his premonition was correct. After killing the two Dragon Sun, Old Lu and the ninth young master should be fine, even if he didn't care whether their spirits would be captured by the 10,000-year ancestor or not. Because the moment they died, the dragon soul had already left. The closest land Dragon Sun to the East Sea was the fourth, Lu Junpu prison. During the battle of myriad demons at the foot of Cloudy Mountain, number 4 should have been present as well, but Li Yunxin did not come into contact with him. He only knew that this Long Sun's territory was in the northwest of the Midland, from the Wayne River of the Luocha country in the west to the Chahan Mountain in the east. The territory was vast, but the population was sparse. As for the palace, he did not know where it was hidden. Although he was walking step by step, with every step he took, he traveled dozens of miles. With such speed, the surrounding scenery should have become illusory. However, he could see everything clearly and would not miss a single detail. So he found that after walking out of the place that had been ravaged by the sea, there was still no sign of human habitation. Normally, when the coast was in trouble, the refugees should have gathered around here and then moved inland with difficulty. However, now there were only collapsed houses, the embers of the fire, and broken armor. This generation had been hit by the flames of war. And the intensity was very high and the scale was very large. It should be the result of Rong Jun's invasion, or rather, the conquest. It seemed that the East Sea nation had been annexed by the Rong nation. He was a little surprised. In the past, when he helped Ding Juran for a while, he only felt that he was an interesting person and could be used. However, he did not expect that things would get out of hand and he would actually help him become the world lord. If the territory conquered by Rong Jun could be defended, the territory of the Rong nation would be close to the territory of the Li nation at its peak. This meant that in more than half a year, the small Rong nation had expanded more than 100 times. As soon as this thought occurred to him, the forests, hills, and destroyed fields suddenly passed by him. Looking forward, he saw a city. There were gaps in the city wall, and there were also traces of smoke and fire on the wall. However, he could hear the bustling sounds of people in the city, although not all of them were laughter. He liked the life between the human world and the marketplace. But other than the time he spent with Lu Laodao in the city of Wei, he never had the time or the opportunity to experience it in detail. Now that he saw the city, he was stunned. But then he changed direction and went to the vast wilderness beside the city. Although the life of the marketplace was interesting, it was not something that could be enjoyed just by looking at flowers on horseback. Because it was interesting because of people. In the world, there was nothing more interesting than people. However, that meant a lot of time and energy. But he had more important things to do now. As soon as he entered the wilderness, he released his powerful qi and knew everything in the forest. He was looking for traces of demons. The demons had their own intelligence network, so he could find out where LV Junpu Lao's lair was by finding one person. However, there were much fewer demons now. The wilderness was extremely vast, and it took him a full hour to travel several hundred kilometers to the northwest before he found his target. At first he found people. They were a group of refugees in ragged clothes. Although they were separated by the dense forest, Li Yunxin could still hear them. Then he realized that they were speaking in the dialect of the Donghai kingdom. When he listened carefully, the dialect was even more familiar. It was the accent of the Whitewater town. The accent of the people around the Whitewater town was mainly Chu, which sounded rough and bold, like it was mixed with the smell of the sea. There were about 30 to 40 people in this group. There were few strong men, but many old and weak women and children. What they were talking about was also worrying about their own future. It seemed that they were being driven by a powerful demon to go northwest. In this era where the Xianmen lost their virtue, the flames of war and demons ran rampant, it was not unusual for a group of people to be caught by a demon. He had already heard about such a tragic situation from Lu Gongzan. But what interested him was that although this group of people was worried, they were not scared. If a demon wanted to catch them and make them into a human meat feast, it would not be like this. This group of people had demon aura. He captured this trace of demon aura and spread out his spiritual sense. Soon he found the location of the demon who drove this group of people away. It was by the stream. It was a good-looking white-faced scholar. He first washed his face with water and began to wash his feet. After washing his feet, he seemed to feel that he was not clean enough, so he took off his clothes and began to take a bath. Li Yunxin appeared by the stream with a thought. If a person like him wanted to restrain his breath, he could become one with heaven and earth. Therefore, even though he appeared only 3 steps away from the demon, he was not discovered for a moment. The demon was completely unaware that a Grand Supreme had appeared behind him. He was still happily scrubbing his back in the stream. He was humming a tune while scrubbing his back, and this tune was also familiar to Li Yunxin. The group of people who were caught had a Donghai accent, and the tune the demon was humming was a folk song of the Qin kingdom. He was a new Grand Supreme, so it was like he had gotten a new toy. Along the way he tried all kinds of magical powers that could be used in this realm. Although he had not yet mastered all of them, he gradually got some clues. What he was most interested in was the fruit of fate, and fate, that he did not think much of before. Now that he saw this demon who loved cleanliness, he tried it on him. In fact, he was not sure what he wanted to see. He just wanted to try what he could see. But soon he found something. In the fruit of fate or the river of fate he found this demon. This was very mysterious. For example, this river originally did not have him. But the moment Li Yunxin thought about it, this demon gathered in and became an extremely inconspicuous small tributary hidden under countless torrents. If Li Yunxin was not in the mysterious realm and did not have the ability of the Grand Supreme realm to slightly transcend this river and survey the whole situation, it would be difficult to find it through the hidden torrents. But now he easily stared at this small stream. This also made him realize that he had indeed missed a lot of things because he did not cultivate systematically. Now that he was a Grand Supreme, he could use this method to see a person's future. But many people with lower cultivation levels than him could also do the same. This meant that the method of divination should have been passed down by the Grand Supreme experts in the past. At the beginning they discovered what Li Yunxin had discovered, and then after a long period of trial and error, they concluded a certain method. Using this method, people with low cultivation levels could also use such a divine ability. The difference between the two was like how when Li Yunxin calculated what 9 nines equal to, he counted from 1 to 81 in an instant with his super strong brain power. Elementary school students with low cultivation levels would know 9 by 9 81 as soon as they opened their mouths. However, as the saying went, one person can defeat 10 people with great strength. He did not need to care about those small tricks anymore. He was already standing on the high ground, and his powerful divine ability made up for any shortcomings and skills. He saw that this demon could be considered to have done a lot of evil. He was involved in every case of cannibalism and harming people. But at that time he had just taken human form and lived in the forest. He had no one to teach him and he did not know any etiquette. Almost all the cruel things he did were out of instinct. But later he met a benefactor who enlightened him and he slowly restrained his nature, becoming what he was today. Li Yunxin could only see him in this long river, but not the benefactor. If he wanted to include that person he needed to know more detailed information. For example, skin, hair, birth date, etc. But that also meant that he would be involved with a third person. After learning about the existence of the River of Fate, he was much more careful about this kind of thing, so he did not continue to investigate. At least for now, he knew that this demon was not full of evil and could live for the time being. So he asked, "Where are you taking those people?" It was originally a sunny day with a blazing sun, and they were by a stream in a secluded valley. Except for the sound of flowing water, birds and wind, there was no other sound. But suddenly a second person's voice appeared. This made the white-clothed demon jump in fright, and he suddenly jumped high in the water. Just like a cat would suddenly show a fierce face when it was frightened. This demon was frightened and actually showed his real body in the air. His originally good-looking face became protruding, and a sharp beak protruded. His naked body was suddenly covered with a layer of sparse white feathers, and the black skin underneath was vaguely visible. But he still maintained his human form and did not show his full form. When he fell back into the water, he returned to his original appearance, took 3 steps back and shouted, "Who is it?" Li Yunxin smiled, "So it's a little black chicken." After he said this, the black chicken spirit was stunned. He stared at him for a while and suddenly bowed his head. His face was buried in the stream, and when he spoke, bubbles came out. My lord, I have eyes but can't see, have eyes but can't see." Suddenly hearing the word president come out of the mouth of a demon in the wilderness made Li Yunxin feel a sense of incongruity, but at the same time she also felt a sense of intimacy. He raised his hand and took the demon to the shore and asked with interest, "You call me lord? Who taught you that?" The demon only dared to look up at him and quickly buried his face again and said tremblingly, "Brother Pheasant." Li Yunxin nodded, "Oh, Pheasant. How is he now?" After the 9th young master left on the sea, Long Jiu also took Pheasant, who was getting along well with him. Later, Little Jiu came back and Pheasant stayed on the land, not wanting to hear his name here. But it was also normal. This place was not far from Donghai Kingdom, and if he went northwest he would pass through Qing Kingdom, so it was reasonable for him to wander around here. Trembling with fear, the demon said, "Brother Shanji is in the kingdom of Qingqing. How do you know me?" He didn't want to waste time listening to the demon, so he flicked his fingers to help him. The chicken spirit's speech immediately became fluent. "I have seen Lord Pheasant's portrait. Brother Pheasant, let us see Lord Pheasant's portrait. So when I saw you today, I knew that such a handsome, elegant, and distinguished person is exactly like Lord Pheasant. Who else in the world has such a face?" Li Yunxin thought for a while and said, "That makes sense. What are you going to do with these people?" The chicken spirit answered, "Lord Pheasant once said that I, the little demon protection, have to protect the little demons and the people in the world. Brother Pheasant saw the flames of war on the land, and many people have lost their homes, so he asked us to go to different places and gather the homeless people to the city of Wei. The city of Wei has been rebuilt?" Yes. The chicken spirit said, "Brother Pheasant and Lady Sui are in the city? Who is Lady Sui?" The chicken spirit was stunned. I know there used to be a person called Qiao. Qiao. Li Yunxin let out a sigh. "Qiao Jiesen. Yes. Good. Then continue with your work." Li Yunxin said this and turned to leave, but the chicken spirit hurriedly kowtowed. Lord Pheasant, I have something to report." He paused. Speak. Here, to the west there is a demon king. The chicken spirit hurriedly said, I want to bring people to pass by him, but he always refuses, saying that he wants to eat half of it. But his realm is extremely high, I can't beat him. Li Yunxin laughed. Extremely high, how high? The chicken spirit dared to raise his head. He is already in the real state. Li Yunxin laughed. Let's go. Bring me to meet this master. Chapter 799. The chicken spirit said, President, not only is the Monster King's cultivation level high, he also has a powerful artifact. I've made friends with 2 or 3 friends in the past few days. They are not the same as the Monster King. Should we ask them to come with us? Li Yunxin took a few glances at him. The chicken spirit didn't know why his president was looking at him. He lowered his head, feeling uneasy. Li Yunxin said, How many people are there in the Little Demon Protectorate? What rank are you in it? The chicken spirit pondered to himself, wondering if he had offended this president with something he had said. However, he didn't know what went wrong. The Demon King was in the true realm. And he did have a powerful Dharma treasure. His cultivation level was low, so the true realm was an unimaginable level for him. For example, a child looked up at the foot of a mountain and saw that the mountain was thousands of meters high. It was so majestic that it made people tremble. Who cares if it was 5,000 meters high or 8,000 meters high? They all looked so majestic. Who would know the difference? Hearing Li Yunxin's question, the chicken spirit answered, I am just an errand boy. I only saw Brother Pheasant from afar and saw the president's face. I don't know how many people there are in the Little Demon Protectorate. I also don't know what rank is there. So you are a soldier in the mortal army. Li Yunxin looked at him and said, A soldier who has just put down his hoe. If you don't know that there are sergeants, brigade commanders, and generals, you don't know the difference between the heavy cavalry of the Li Kingdom and the scouts of the Qin Kingdom. The series of terms made the chicken spirit's head spin. Since he had just transformed, his cultivation level was between the peak of the emptiness realm and the transcendent realm. Therefore, although he was smart, he wasn't the smartest. For a moment he was dumbfounded. After pondering for a while, he finally said, This lowly one thinks maybe that whatever army is stronger. Li Yunxin laughed. It's fun to see more little things like you. Let's go. Tell your friends to save their energy. With that, he waved his sleeves and took the chicken spirit into the forest. About a dozen breaths later, he appeared in a valley. Li Yunxin used to like to play the game of pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. For example, this little demon was asking him for help, thinking that the true realm demonic king's cultivation was high and his treasures were powerful, so it would be difficult for his guild leader to fight him. Humiliating the demon king and then killing him might sound melodramatic, but it was still a very satisfying thing. But now, his cultivation level was the highest in the world. Although he wanted to play, he couldn't play with some powerful true realm Yao King. Very boring. For example, a plutocrat with enough wealth to influence the political situation of a country wouldn't go to some county's top 50 companies to seek a sense of superiority. Thus, when he landed in the valley, he put down the chicken spirit and looked around. It was winter. Although this area was in the south and the vegetation in the forest was still lush, some of the trees that had lost their leaves were showing signs of decay. The valley was not big and there was a cave at the end. There were bushes on both sides of the road, making it look very messy. There was a small path on the ground as if it had been made by a beast. There were no demon soldiers patrolling, nor were there any sentries or arrow towers. It seemed that the true realm Yao King had just settled here not long ago and hadn't formed a scale yet. It was really the most shabby Yao King's lair he had ever seen. But thinking about it carefully, it made sense. Back then, any demon with a bit of ambition would bring their demon soldiers to the Cloud Mountain to overthrow the Mystic Gate, and most of them died. Not many of the little demons survived and only a few of the big demons escaped. Thus, it was rare to see the grand occasion of the big demon's lair being filled with little demons. It was normal. This one could be considered to be extremely timid in the past. He didn't seek death and survived. In this chaotic world where demons and demons coexisted, he still hid deep in the mountains and extorted a few people to eat. He really didn't grow up. The moment he landed, he said, "The one inside, come out." The chicken spirit didn't know the air dance technique, and because it had been swept up by Li Yunxin, it suddenly heard a low roar coming from the cave. Then a gust of wind surged out and a white tiger jumped out of the cave. Behind the tiger there were 4 gray wolves the size of calves. Behind the gray wolves, there were 10 or so red foxes the size of lambs. Li Yunxin's aura was hard to detect, but these beasts that had yet to develop intelligence were very alert. As soon as they jumped out of the cave, they immediately lay on the ground and trembled, knowing that there was an extremely terrifying existence not far away. However, they crouched in 2 rows like a guard of honor. Then the main character appeared, a brute wearing full armor, dragging a large blade out. The chicken spirit immediately became alert and said in a low voice, "Chairman, it's that treasure." Li Yunxin glanced at the blade. It was actually a normal saber used by the human world's army. However, this one should be used by some kind of elite soldier. It was especially large. The entire blade was black, only the tip of the blade was shining. It was a faint gold color. If one looked closely, they would discover that the faint gold color seemed to be some kind of fragment that had been cast onto the blade. The entire blade was an ordinary item, but the fragment contained spirit energy and baleful aura. Li Yunxin glanced at the blade and smiled. He thought it was some kind of treasure. After the Battle of Cloud Mountain, he defeated the Tao Lord in front of the demons. During that time he gave up some of the saints' treasures and casually threw away the broken armor. But to him it was trash, but to the demons it was a treasure. At that time, whenever he scattered some, a group of demons would fight over it. The fragment on this True Realm Demon King's blade was one of the trash that he threw away. He didn't know what kind of weapon was broken, but the fragment was picked up and passed to him. It was so poor that it made one's heart ache. Seeing him smile, the Demon King frowned. He wasn't the chicken spirit by Li Yunxin's side. He knew that although he couldn't see through Li Yunxin's cultivation, it made him feel slightly uneasy, as if he had an ominous feeling. He should be a strong cultivator. He stared at him for a while, then said in a low voice, "You black chicken, you found help? Where did this king come from? Are you trying to make peace or?" Li Yunxin interrupted him. He smiled, then turned to the black chicken spirit and said seriously, "You want to get rid of this scourge?" The chicken spirit was stunned. He looked at the Demon King, then at Li Yunxin. After a while he said, "Yes." "Then beg me," said Li Yunxin. The chicken spirit was stunned again. When the Demon King heard Li Yunxin say, "Get rid of me," he knew that it wasn't a negotiation. Immediately he brandished his saber and shouted, "Friend, watch carefully. My treasure." Li Yunxin ignored him. He sighed, then said to the black chicken spirit, "If I want you to beg me, then beg me." Only then did the chicken spirit realize that his leader wasn't acting like a spoiled child. He didn't know what Li Yunxin meant, but he knew that a master had his own way of doing things. He hurriedly said, "Please? I beg you, leader, get rid of him." Li Yunxin smiled, "That's right. You're the one begging me to kill him, not the other way around. This ill-fated relationship has nothing to do with me." After saying so, the Demon King raised his treasure in front of him. Then he suddenly pushed the treasure against his own neck. Even with his great strength, he couldn't resist such a terrifying force. To be more precise, his great strength was as weak as a breeze. The True Realm Demon's head fell to the ground. The Demon King's soul immediately left his body, standing upright on top of the corpse that had just fallen. He didn't understand how he died. Li Yunxin ignored the chicken spirit, who was even more stunned than the newly born Demon King's soul, and walked to the Demon King's corpse. He raised his hand and caught the Demon King's soul. Then he raised his hand and gave it 2 slaps. Only then did the Demon King's soul regain its consciousness. It widened its eyes and shouted, I. But with a flick of his finger, Li Yunxin lifted his own bloody head. He injected a bit of netherworld energy into it, helping it quickly become a ghost cultivator. "Hold your head," Li Yunxin said kindly. "Choose a direction and walk. If you meet any Demon King, tell them that you were killed by Li Yunxin. Then tell them that if they don't give face to the little demon, they won't give face to me. Walk all the way to the seaside, then head to the East Sea. If you're lucky enough to find a good place, you'll be able to live. If you're unlucky, once the netherworld energy in your body disperses, your soul will also dissipate." After saying this, he let go of the Demon King's soul. "Get lost." Only then did the Demon King realize what had happened to him. He widened his eyes and shouted, "You're Li Yunxin? Here. Aren't you dead? Where do you want me to go?" Although he didn't want to walk, his legs didn't listen to him and he started walking quickly. One had to know that when one was refined into a ghost cultivator, one would have an obsession. Li Yunxin turned him into a ghost cultivator, but he didn't care what the Demon King's obsession was. He used his Grand Supreme Realm to forcefully inject a thought into this unlucky demon, to complete the task he had given him. This obsession was so strong that it was almost instinctive. It wasn't something that a demon king's free will could resist. Rather than calling him a ghost cultivator, he was more like a puppet. In the blink of an eye, the demon king hugged his head and disappeared into the wilderness. Li Yunxin turned to look at the chicken spirit. "I'm dead? Who said that?" The chicken spirit's face was pale as he stared at his leader. After a while he said, He still couldn't accept this. A towering mountain, a demon king in the true state, was killed in the blink of an eye. Li Yunxin walked over and patted his face. "Speak." The chicken spirit came back to his senses and stared at him. "A few days ago some ghost soldiers said that they came from the sea, said that some ancestor on the sea killed you." He immediately said, "But Brother Chicken said that was bullsh*t. It was bullsh*t, Li Yunxin said. "I'm leaving." The chicken spirit was stunned again. Originally, meeting his guild leader in the wilderness was already a very exciting thing. Now that he realized that his leader's divine sense had surpassed the limits of his imagination, he was even more excited. He thought that since he had gone through a life-and-death crisis with his leader, he might be able to get some help. Who would have thought that once the matter was over, the leader would say, "I'm leaving?" He felt a sense of loss. Seeing Li Yunxin's body tremble slightly, he felt a little expectant. He thought that the chicken spirit would say something to him. But in the blink of an eye, the figure in front of him had disappeared. Let's not talk about the disappointed chicken spirit. More than 10 days after Li Yunxin left the valley, many strange fellows suddenly appeared in the vast forests and wilderness in the north of Rong Kingdom. These fellows were all big monsters with cultivation above the transcendent state or the true state, at least they were when they were alive. But now they had all become ghostly cultivators. They were either holding their own heads or holding parts of their broken bodies, wandering around with a long face. Whenever they encountered a demon's lair, they would stay in front of the demon's door and start crying. The content was surprisingly similar. Everyone looked carefully. My head, arms, chest, and heart were all taken by Li Yunxin. He said that he didn't want to save face for the little monster, which means that he didn't want to save face. "I hope that everyone can learn from me and not stand on the opposite side of the trend of history. Do more good deeds and don't be greedy for blood so that the cave can be safe." Soon, the remaining fiendish demons in the wilderness and those who had taken over the cities realized that a malefic existence had returned. Some timid ones quickly closed their doors and hid. Some bold ones watched carefully, trying to find out where the malefic star had gone, but he had already left their territory. Most of the latter group quickly joined the tearful complaints. The world today was not the world of the past. In the past, demons lived in seclusion in the mountains and people thought that it was just a rumor. The Midland was vast and sparsely populated, so the flow of information was not smooth. Even if there were demons doing evil in a certain place, it was hard for the news to spread. But in this year, the demons had reappeared and all the rumors had become true. There were even some demons in the army that fought in the south and the north. Most of these demons were called Sendo, or Heavenly Master, and they used their powers to interfere with the affairs of the human world. Most of them were evil monsters that occupied the cities to do evil. The armies of the human world had fought with them many times, and because they all had the help of the demons, there had been victories and defeats. But even though they couldn't completely eradicate the demons from the human world, the sense of doomsday that they felt when the demons first appeared had gradually faded. People started to deal with the demons like how they dealt with powerful beasts. They even set up wind watchers in various places, to sneak into the forests and spy on the demons. Because of this, many demons were killed, and the rumor that Li Yunxin had returned to the land and was even more powerful than before, gradually spread to the ears of the people. The Wind Watchers gathered information very quickly. They were sent to Rong City, the capital of the Rong Kingdom, at an even faster speed. When the former Black Knifing Jurin, now Emperor Rong, saw the news, it was already 10 days after Li Yunxin left the Black Chicken Spirit. The thin paper that carried the news recorded the details of the investigation by many Wind Watchers. This included when a certain demon was slain and when it appeared at a certain place. The description of Li Yunxin's appearance and tone were all listed. From this information, it could be inferred that Li Yunxin was heading north. If he didn't change his direction, he would reach the vicinity of Rong City in 2 or 3 days, which was about 100 miles away. But for a powerful demon with magical powers, it was indeed very close. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.